Sure, let's see. Going into YouTube now. Hello. Okay, I think I'm live. I'm turning on Periscope. Let's see. Yes. Hello. Hello. Okay. Yes. Hi, Cecilia and Lauren. And um Overcoming Understanding says you got a microphone. I have actually had a microphone. Um I I just have kind of kept it hidden and out of the way. So I got a different table is what I ended up doing, and this works much better. It's actually just my dining room table that I've moved like 20 feet this way. So yeah, the mic is pretty high tech, right? Like welcome to the year 2016. I'm getting there. Slowly but surely I'm figuring out technology and the interwebs. Slowly but surely. So yeah, let's see. Adrian is here. Doug is here. Hello, Doug. So, how are you guys doing tonight? What's going on? We've got people on Periscope too, which is cool. Adrian says the mic looks so pro. I know, doesn't it? Like people that are just tuning into the show are going to think that I actually know what I'm doing, and we won't have to tell them that that's not the truth. So, got my cup of hot tea. Ghost Hunter Mandy is here. Oh gosh. Overcoming Understanding says, I realize why Donald Trump makes me so uncomfortable. He reminds me of my ex. Well, yeah, he's saying some pretty far out there things, isn't he? I've got to figure out why this chat. Oh, hold on. I know what's going on. My screen is out to like 125%. And so I can't read the chat. Okay, I got it. I figured it out. So, all right. We are in business. Overcoming Understanding says, yeah, just the same super obnoxious, unrealistic, raging anger. Yeah, so he's a good example of that level of like narcissistic rage where he gets challenged or criticized and he just goes off the chart. I don't have a TV, so I don't keep up to date with a lot of this stuff. Kind of what I hear is through YouTube and everything, but I know how he was with Rosie O'Donnell kind of way back when. And, and Donald Trump is all about attention. He's all about media. He knows how to play this game. And so it's kind of hard to tell what's for show and what's true, sincere emotion. But, yeah, it's kind of scary. His, his temper is kind of scary. Okay, ambiguous nomad says, "Hey guys, how do you talk or get through to somebody suffering from Stockholm syndrome?" Um, I guess can you elaborate a little bit more on what's going on? I'm going to just make some assumptions based off of what you're saying, but I'd really rather not assume. I'd rather get clarity. So, let's talk a little bit about Stockholm syndrome. So, Stockholm syndrome, the term was coined based off of some bank robbers about 50 or so years ago, and they had taken hostages. And several of the bank robbers, I think they were all men, several of the hostages were women. And they held them captive at gunpoint for, I want to say it was like 3 or 4 days. They were together for quite a while. And after the hostage situation ended, the hostages were now defending them. And so some psychiatrists and psychologists were observing this, and they're trying to figure out how did this happen? Why did this happen? Why are these people that were held hostage, why are they defending their captors? And actually, kind of fast forward, what ended up happening was, I believe, two of them ended up marrying the captors. So a lot of people that are in abusive relationships, it goes down the very same way. And I think really kind of what's at the core of it is that, people are not 100% bad or good, right? Like, we're all human beings. We all have kind of a blend of character traits in us. And so those of us that are more empathetic, that are more compassionate, that tend to see the good in other people, tend to focus on those qualities. Especially if that person, like in a relationship setting, if that person's meeting some need, which they generally are if we're dating them, right? Then they get very defensive about it. And so a lot of this has to do with what I call empty buckets, and it has to do with a term called cognitive dissonance. So it's very common for people that are in abusive relationships, if for them to get very defensive of their partner. And so it's one of those things, if you know somebody that's in an abusive relationship, the last thing you want to do is really come down hard on their partner. Because what happens is the person who's in the relationship, even if, let's say if I was in an abusive relationship, right, and you were a friend of mine, and you were to say, Dana, you've got to get out of this. This guy is nothing but bad news, and it's a bad situation. And even if I were to say, yeah, he's trouble, what was I thinking? And I'm agreeing with you, and I'm the one that came to you, and I'm the one that's all upset about it. Because there's so many feelings involved, kind of nostalgia, which really is cognitive dissonance, kicks in. And it's this whole feeling of, well, but he's not all that bad. And, well, he had a bad childhood, or she had a bad childhood. And we justify, we minimize, we deflect, we deny, we blame. And so then what happens is the person that's in that abusive relationship starts talking themselves into staying. So especially if they're defending their partner to this other person. So if you were to say, yeah, that guy, so he's not good to you, and he does all these things, generally speaking, victims of abuse will start saying, well, but he's not bad all the time. It's only when he drinks, or it's only when he's under stress, or well, we just had a baby. There's always kind of this justification and this explanation. So and so, yes, okay, so ambiguous nomad goes on, and is saying, my sibling is in an abusive relationship, and she's always defending him or hiding information that makes him look bad, and tells us we won't understand because we don't love him. So, yes, that's very, very common. And the reason being is it kind of what I just said. So it's like people oftentimes too, they don't realize that they're even in an abusive relationship, even if they're being called names, even if they're being cheated on, even if they're being hit, even if they're being severely beaten up. It's hard for people to truly identify when they're in an abusive relationship, and they will justify it to themselves. Like I said, well, it's because you don't understand him like I do. He had a bad childhood. This is how we fight. They still think that they are in a normal relationship with a normal person who has the capacity for empathy and remorse, and who could potentially have the desire for change. And so they're clinging to that hope, hoping that this person's going to change. Because this person is meeting a very basic need of theirs, which is generally like love or affection or attention or importance. And there's so many elements as to why people have a hard time walking away from abusive relationships. But another big reason too is abusive people tend to often, if not always, spin things around. Because in their mind, they never have the problem. It's always their target that has the problem. So that's kind of the classic look at what you made me do, which is what abusive people tend to say all the time. So it's sort of like, well, it's your fault that I hit you. It's your fault that I had to yell. It's your fault that, and on and on and on. Like it's your fault that I went to jail for hitting you, right? So really the best way to kind of break. So anyways, I guess the point of me saying that is, so targets of abuse tend to be continually blamed for everything that's going on. And many of them, us that have gone through it, tend to take on the abusive person's reality as their own. And so they buy into it and they think, oh my gosh, I just need to be better. I need to be a better girlfriend or a better wife, or I need to be more patient or more understanding or less of a nag or. And so this is the whole walking on eggshells thing. So she might be defensive in part because she's thinking that her behavior plays a part in her being abused. And so she might think that a lot of this is her fault. It's not. Abuse is never a person's fault. It's the abusive person's fault, right? They're responsible for their own actions. They are choosing to abuse. So what you can do if you've got if a loved one that's in an abusive relationship is just to let them talk and to not, and it's hard, and it's really, really, really hard to try to not talk bad about their partner. And so just to empathize and just say, you know what, wow, that sounds really scary, or that sounds really dangerous, or and to just be there to listen. If you're feeling burned out with this, because we all get burned out with this, like, and I do too. I have a hard time. There's some stories that I've listened to where I can see, because I'm an outside party to it, right, that this is a major deal. Like this person needs to run. They are in severe, serious danger, and it's really hard. And and I don't. I guess that I do not do this perfectly either. So there are many times where I am trying to wake them up because there's kind of this fog of cognitive dissonance that sets in where people are justifying their behavior. And because this bad behavior has become the new normal, they're not seeing what kind of danger they're really in. Even if the person has tried strangling them, even if they've knocked out all of their teeth with a gun, even if they've threatened their life, even if. And so it's really hard to keep cool, calm, and collected if you're listening to all of these stories. So I would encourage you to give your sister a link to. There's many different support groups out there on narcissistic abuse. There's a handful of groups on Facebook. Mine is called, the link is facebook.com/groups/healing after narcissistic abuse. There's also a support group on my website, which is narcissist.com/forum, FORUM. And so I would just encourage her, you know what? There's a bunch of people there that have been there, they've done that, and they'll listen to you, and they're there around the clock. Because especially in the Facebook group, that's a really, really active group. There's people there 24 hours a day. They're all over the world. So I think what really helps a lot of people that are going through abusive relationships is to hear their stories, because we all tell like different versions of the same story. It's really uncanny. So if they can read stories from other people, they're probably going to start seeing elements of what happened to them in the stories from other people. And so it's going to help click more, because they have that, because cognitive dissonance, that need to justify and minimize and deny and deflect all of this bad behavior, we only have that when it pertains to us. And so of course, right, like it's much easier for you to see issues that I have in my life that I'm probably blind to, and it's much easier for me to see issues that somebody else has in their life, because there's not that emotional investment, because it's not our life. So that's what can be so helpful with support groups, is they're getting that. They have kind of this neutral third-party perspective on other people's stories, but because we're all telling the same story, it can really help kind of wake up a person to see their situation more clearly. So, but she can do, or you can do a search for, narcissists or sociopaths or anything like that on Facebook, and there's going to be a handful of groups that show up, and you might want to encourage her too to join a couple of different groups, because and just say, you know what, just maybe just humor me and just join these groups and read some of these stories. I think you'll find it very healing. And so that way she's not, she's just kind of humoring you, right? Like, you're not, she doesn't have to agree that she's in an abusive relationship, because for people even to agree, to even use the word abusive relationship, that triggers a lot of cognitive dissonance. Because, and I saw this time and time and time again when I was working at the domestic violence shelter, it was this idea of, well, I know things are bad, but I wouldn't go so far as to say it's an abusive relationship. And so people would really back up when we started using words like abuse or abuser or even narcissist or sociopath. People are like, whoa, 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 you know, he's just lying and cheating and threatening to kill me and beating me up. I wouldn't go so far as to say he's an abusive person, right? It doesn't make sense, but to outside people, but if you're once you're in it, it makes perfect sense because of that level of justification and denial that it's that bad. Because a lot of us that do stay in these relationships, it's there are feelings there. And so we are in love with who we're hoping this person can be, because abusive people tend to have this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality. And so we fall in love with Dr. Jekyll, right? This smart, charming, interesting person, but we're terrified by Mr. Hyde. And so so when you hear people say, well, why did you stay in an abusive relationship? And we oftentimes say, well, because I loved him or I loved her. We're in love with the Dr. Jekyll. We're terrified of the Mr. Hyde. But it's hard for our brain to separate, because there's two very different people that are sharing the same body. And it's unless you've gone through it, it's really hard to even explain it, because it's just, and even those of us that have gone through it, it's hard to even understand it. Because it's just a very, very confusing situation all the way around. So let's see. Lauren says she's 18 days no contact. That's huge. Yay, you. Ghost Hunter says, I have an inner Mrs. Hyde. I call her Heidi. Yeah. And we all have that, you know, less than desirable side of ourselves, right? But abusive people, that Mr. Hyde side of them comes out at without being provoked. It's just, I actually did another video earlier today that I'll be releasing probably tomorrow or the next day, and I was talking a little bit about this. So this is another thing that's so confusing about abusive people is they tend to very much be in their own reality, right? So there's the two main types of reality. There's the reality that most of us live in, which is one of solutions oriented, kind of co-creation type, mutuality reality, right? Where we're trying to work together, we're working towards a solution, we want to be happy, we want things to work out, all right? We're trying to problem solve issues. Abusive people don't care about any of that. Their whole goal is to maintain and keep power and control over themselves, over their target, over their lives, over everything. And they do this by any means necessary. And so if they are confronted or challenged in any sort of way, but here's where it gets interesting. If they're confronted or challenged in any way that's real or perceived, they don't handle it well. And that's when they fly off the handle. So when people are seeing this really bizarre behavior that's making them wonder, is this person bipolar? Are they mentally ill? What is happening? Because this person just had a very extreme response to nothing. like, or their reaction doesn't match the event. So that's a very confusing thing for a lot of people that are witnessing abusive behavior. It's sort of like, wait a minute, wait, what? Like, I told you, I complimented you on your shoes, and now you're screaming at me. Like, but in the abuser's mind, they create this whole narrative where, so let's say, for example, if you were to say, hey, I really like your shoes, they might be like, oh, you're being sarcastic, and how dare you, and so what, my other shoes aren't good enough, and they could create this whole narrative, and it leads to them verbally or physically abusing somebody. And so partners of abusive people that have that kind of behavior that's so erratic, they're constantly walking on eggshells trying to figure out how to not provoke them, because but that's the thing, is it's a no-win situation, because nothing they do is provoking them to begin with, because it's all in the abuser's head, because they have this their own reality, and so it's just this perception, like they're being triggered by things that we don't even know are they're aware of. But the way that they spin things, so in their mind, we're being sarcastic, we're egging them on, we're the ones that are being abusive, we're hurting them. Like we're not sharing the same reality with them at that when those moments happen. When they turn into that Mr. Hyde person, we are not in the same reality. We're still in that Dr. Jekyll reality. Now they've become Mr. Hyde. It's a no-win. You can't win when they've turned into Mr. Hyde. So it's just a very bizarre and crazy making and dangerous and destructive dynamic when that happens. And so there's a term out there, the called narcissistic rage, which generally happens after they've encountered a narcissistic injury, which is basically just a fancy way of saying their ego was hurt or challenged or threatened. So sometimes you can tell, right? So if a narcissist, like, okay, so we're talking about Donald Trump earlier, right? So if somebody makes fun of his hair, or you know, it's an attack on his ego, he goes bananas, right? That's a pretty standard response. So he suffered a narcissistic injury. He gets this really like inflammatory response, which is way disproportionate to what actually happened. Triggers this narcissistic rage, where and of course it depends on the narcissist, right? Like to how extreme they go. Some of them yell and scream, some of them cuss, some of them hit, some of them kill. So it just depends how they react to it. But the thing is, you never know what you're dealing with, because they're not in our reality. So just because they've never hit or killed before doesn't mean that they won't this time around. And so you're dealing with a person that has no empathy, they have no remorse, and they feel totally justified in their actions. So they're incredibly dangerous. And, you just have to. This is why I encourage people, you always have to err on the side of caution, because you just don't know when that switch is really going to flip. So let's see. I'm going to scroll up here a little bit. Okay, Ambiguous Nomad says, it's so difficult. If I could leave, I would, but I'm young and I'm not financially stable. I'm forced to be home right now, and I have a narcissist mother, and I'm the only one who can see her for what she is. So you are not alone in that. So please just know that. And that feeling that you're the only one who can see her for what she is also very, very normal. So abusive people they target certain people. Okay, generally those that are closest to them. So family members or spouses or like boyfriends or girlfriends. And so so other people, like people that maybe that don't know them that well, even certain family members, never see that side of them. And abuse generally happens in private. So it'll happen over the phone, it'll happen through text messages, it'll happen when you're alone in the car or you're alone at the house. And so targets of this kind of abuse tend to be. They're like, nobody's going to believe me. And nobody else sees it. So, what you can do, and that's so I guess just kind of, I hope that gives you some peace about the fact that your situation, that is pretty standard. So you're not alone in that. You're not crazy, and you know there are, like I said, there are support groups out there, and I would encourage you to consider joining a few, because it can really help you get through all of this, and it'll answer, I think, a lot of different questions that you might have. But so what you can do, really, what the only thing any of us can do, is to try to use the power of anticipation as much as we possibly can. So you know your mom best, and you kind of know how she normally tends to abuse, right? Is it name calling? Is it yelling? Is it put downs? What does she do? What does she tend to fixate on? And most abusive people will go after what we're most sensitive about. So if you're most sensitive about your weight, or how you're doing in school, or kind of whatever, that's what they'll focus on. So knowing this ahead of time, then you can kind of plan accordingly. So you can realize, okay, I'm not going to be home. If I know she's going to be home alone at this time, I'm going to try to not be there. I'm going to stay busy, or, just trying to anticipate to the best of your ability, to kind of avoid those, avoid being a target of her abuse as much as humanly possible. And then, really working towards getting yourself to a place where you're able to stay safe and sane. And here's another big part in that. So the whole sanity piece of it. Abuse really does grind a person down, right? And but it doesn't necessarily have to be this way. So I think once there's that awareness of abusive people, we don't share the same reality. And their reality is the hurtful, horrible things that your mother may say, or that any abusive person may say, is not truth. That's them saying mean things to try to hurt you, right? So to just to take a step back and to kind of detach emotionally, and just realize everything she's saying, it's just a bunch of nonsense. It's just a bunch of nonsense. It's not real. This is not real. This is a Mr. Hyde crazy bizarro reality, and you don't have to accept any of that as truth. I came across a great quote the other day, and it was something along the lines of, make sure that you keep your feelings and your self-worth in two different buckets. And I really, really liked that, because abusive people like to cause pain. They like to inflict emotion, severe, intense emotion. And negative emotion is oftentimes a lot more intense than positive emotion. And so it's the way of them making themselves feel significant, because they're just dumping their venom onto somebody else. It's awful. So yes, your feelings might be hurt. Do not let this impact your self-worth. Do not take on that reality, that degrading behavior as truth, or that it's a reflection of you, because it's not. Everything that an abusive person says and does is a reflection of them. It's not a reflection of who you are. So S9 says, my mother turned us against each other, always pitting us against each other. I just sent her an email on my boundaries after a guilt trip, and I haven't heard from her. So, narcissists don't respect boundaries. And, it's always good to try to set boundaries with somebody, but realize that it's like trying to set boundaries with a really ornery 5-year-old who's continually gotten their way, except now this 5-year-old is much older, right? So they're much more set in their ways. Narcissists don't care, and they will push boundaries and push boundaries and push boundaries, because it's all about them. It's all about whatever they want. And so, you can voice your boundary, but realize that they're not going to respect it, and if anything, they're going to double up their efforts to break the boundary. It's because it's that sense of entitlement that they have, like, well, how dare you tell me no? It's that bratty 5-year-old inside of them that's lashing out because they can't get whatever they want. So, and with, there's kind of two parts to healthy boundaries, right? There's like stating them, there's being assertive and saying, hey, it's not okay this is not going to happen anymore. Like, I'm not okay with being talked to this way. The other part of a healthy boundary is having consequences. And so if it's with a parent, and if you want to continue having contact, which is your choice, you don't have to, but if it's your choice, if you decide that you want to continue contact, to then you can just tell yourself, you don't even have to tell this other person, but just tell yourself, like, you know what, I'm going to go over there and for holidays or what have you, for Easter dinner, and I'm going to spend an hour. We're going to eat, and then that's it. And then I'm going to go home. Whereas maybe before you felt obligated to stay for 3 days, right? But this time it's sort of like, no, you got things to do. You're really busy. It's not going to work for you. And then you leave. You don't have to argue. You don't have to justify anything. That's your boundary. And it's kind of whatever you're comfortable with. And the way that you can tell how to kind of, if you're honoring your boundaries, is to pay attention to how you feel. So if you're feeling resentful or irritated or frustrated, these are all signs that boundaries need to be reevaluated and tightened up a little bit. Because healthy boundaries, you don't even notice them. Like, you're feeling good. You're feeling really good. You're like, yeah, this was a pretty decent interaction. And then you're able to leave. If you have to leave a family function and you're on the phone for the next, few hours or few days, having to vomit up everything that happened onto somebody else because the whole situation was so toxic that you've got to purge yourself of it, then that's a sign that boundaries need to be tightened up, because that's not normal. And then it's not healthy, right? So, okay, so Pepper says, Dana, at what age will a child become a narcissist where there is no going back from it? My daughter is starting to exhibit the behaviors of her father to a T. Well, there's a couple different thoughts on that. So, generally, the consensus is that personality is fully formed. I think I want to say it's right around the age of like 8 or 10, and that the brain fully develops around the age of 26. But, I personally, I've seen a lot of people make a lot of changes that are much older than that. So I think that's just kind of a general rule of thumb. If you're seeing problematic behavior in her now, this is a good, this is all like a good time for kind of some like learning lessons, right? So teachable moments. And a great way to work with kids is to make everything into a teachable moment, including your mistakes, right? And so pointing out little things. And so making that extra effort to role model good behavior, right? And then to also be accountable for things that you need to work on. And so it's just that continual showing her, this is how we handle anger. This is what we don't do in this family. This is what we do in this family. This is how we say we're sorry. We don't just say it. We take, we take actions to actually repair the damage that was done, right? And then you're just continually working on role modeling the kind of behavior that you want to see, and keeping that communication open with her, because kids especially, they don't have the emotional maturity, they don't have the vocabulary to articulate what's going on with them emotionally. And so this is, a lot of it has to do, narcissists of any age too, it's the same thing. So there's this saying out there that anger is the bodyguard of hurt. And so when kids are hurt emotionally, they lash out. And kids lash out in different ways. Girls tend to be more self-destructive. They tend to be more promiscuous. They tend to cut, these kinds of things. Boys tend to lash out. They're getting in fights. They become just unruly, and they're hard to control. if you're experiencing a lot of like angry behavior from kids, then it really, it's that kind of behavior. It's basically like them saying, let me show you how much pain I'm in, with all of their with all of their actions. And again, a lot of kids, depression, there's a saying out there that depression is anger turned inwards, and there's a lot of truth to that. So just keeping communication open with your daughter, realizing that she doesn't have the vocabulary for this, and kids really don't, and really until like they're in their 20s, because this stuff is not taught. So, if anything, the exact opposite is taught, right? So, we tend to teach kids, we almost like gaslight them in a weird way. So, I'm reading this book right now that'll be the book club book for next month. And it's on controlling people. I'll post a link to it in the description area down below. But she talks about how we invalidate children's emotions so often. So because kids, when you're born into a family, it's this whole concept of, you know, I'm thinking about like road trips and stuff when I was a kid. If we had to go to the bathroom, it didn't matter what we needed because nobody else had to go to the bathroom. So no, the car did not stop unless the adult driving had to go to the bathroom. And if you were a kid, too bad. Your feelings and what was going on with you didn't matter. And a lot of adults do this, I think, unintentionally, right? But they might tell a child, if the child falls and scrapes their knee, they might tell the child, well, that doesn't hurt, you're fine, right? It's okay, you don't need to cry. So they're basically invalid a lot of times it's well-intentioned stuff, but it's still very invalidating to the child because it's saying your experience is not real. When as an adult, we would never tell that to another adult, right? If they fell and if they really scraped up their knee, we wouldn't tell them, oh, you're fine. Oh, you're fine. Get over it. We would say, do you need a Band-Aid? Here's ibuprofen. We would help them. We would validate them, right? So validating your child's emotions and realizing and paying attention to, if and catching yourself if you are justifying or minimizing or denying any behavior that she has or anything that she is telling you about, to take it all very seriously, especially if they have a narcissist. If you're co-parenting with a narcissist, there's probably a lot of stuff going on. There's probably a lot of stuff going on with that child that she doesn't want to tell you about because she's trying to protect you. She doesn't want to hurt your feelings. And she also doesn't want her parents to fight, and she doesn't want to betray the other parent, but she knows something's wrong. And so it's really important to talk about, to just have that open and honest communication, and just say, if dad is telling you, if she comes home and she's crying and she says, well, dad said this to me, to just say, instead of getting defensive because he's still her dad, even though he's a narcissist, to just say, I'm really sorry that dad said those things. That's not okay. I wish he wouldn't have said those things to you. I'm sure that's really hurtful, right? And to validate and to show her, to just give voice to how she's feeling. So I hope that helps. Okay, let me scroll up and yes, I love that. So, Adrienne says, I feel that the low self-esteem comes from how we were programmed as kids with narc parents. What's helped me so much is finding ways to reprogram myself. When I start to be hard on myself, I catch myself now and I try to change that thought into something positive. And so, yes, that's really important to pay attention to our self-talk. And here's what's interesting too about that is to pay attention to whose voice are we really hearing, because I think you'll find it really interesting if you start paying attention to that critical voice in your head. Does it sound like your mom, or does it sound like your dad, or whose critical parent voice is that in your head? And to slow things down, and then to catch yourself and to say, you know what? Yeah, okay, maybe I slacked off and didn't do my laundry. That doesn't mean I'm a slob. It doesn't mean all of these terrible things. It means I just chose to not do my laundry. right? And then to point out things that are good about yourself. The book we read this past month for the book club was by Louise Hay, and it was the You Can Heal Your Life. Fantastic book, and it talks a lot about that, like doing affirmations and reprogramming how we talk to ourselves and how we treat ourselves, because that is huge. And if you did grow up with an abusive parent of any kind, then there is a lot of like work that needs to be done with how we talk to ourselves. Cecilia says, on the way to daycare when she was young, I was ill and I vomited in the back of the van. They yelled at me while making me clean it up. I actually had a very similar experience in my childhood. I was on vacation with my parents. It was one of the very few vacations we took. I'm sure there was, I know there was another reason for it. It wasn't a vacation, it was for something else, because we went to Arkansas. Like, and why we would go, I don't know, it was very strange. And so my brother, we were eating breakfast one morning, and my dad pulled out the orange juice, and my brother poured a big glass of it, and he went to drink it, and he's like, it smells funny. And my dad said, you need to drink it. My brother says, it doesn't taste good. And my dad says, you need to drink it. Quit being so difficult. Drink your damn juice. Well, so, and this is very like, like par for the course. Okay. So my brother chugs down this whole glass of rotten orange juice, not knowing, nobody knew it was rotten except for my brother, who'd been trying to say that, but he wasn't being heard. And my mom was upset with my dad and was saying, Vic, leave him alone. He doesn't want to drink the juice, and it smells funny, and my dad wouldn't have it. Well, then we're going down the road. My brother says, I don't feel good. Can we stop the car? My dad won't stop. My brother keeps saying, I don't feel good. I don't feel good. I don't feel good. Well, then he throws up all over the inside of the car. And then my dad goes bananas, right, about that. And so, so my dad's yelling at my brother. I'm probably yelling at my brother because I'm in the back seat too. My mom is yelling at my dad. Everybody's yelling at everybody. And it's, my brother's crying because now he's in trouble, and he didn't even, like, he's a kid. He didn't even do anything. It's just that kind of ridiculous and selfishness. And that's a lot of, pretty par for the course for a lot of, controlling, abusive people, is they will tell you how you feel. They will tell you whether or not, so like my father is defining my brother. He's saying, no, you're fine. Well, no, actually, he doesn't know if my brother's fine because he's not my brother, right? And so that's what abusive people will do. They will say, oh, well, you're thinking this, or you're feeling this, or you're trying to do this. And it's like, no, actually, nobody knows what another person's trying to do, because we all have our own inner world, right? We all have our own motives, which are like, it's really frustrating and crazy making. So, very invalidating. And it's important to just be aware of that, those kinds of things, and how we're potentially invalidating people. And so Adrian, says, I recommend the audiobook if you don't have a lot of time to read. Audiobooks in traffic make you forget you are in traffic. Louise Hay is a good start for the day. I agree. The audible.com, it's an Amazon company. You can get the audiobooks through there. She's also has a fantastic YouTube channel. It's called Louise Hay, Hay, and you can watch videos there as well. She has a lot of affirmation videos, and I think you can maybe even find her book on YouTube on her channel. So, good stuff to listen to. Feeding your brain. Oh, Josh is here. Hey, Josh. He says, I've been listening to Louise Hay in the morning, and it is awesome. It is awesome. So she's just a really neat lady, and her affirmations are fantastic. And it's funny. So people, speaking of affirmations and everything, so people have been saying for a while they've been wanting me to put together like an affirmation video, and I've heard from a handful of people that they listen to a lot of my videos when they're going to sleep at night. And so I'm trying to work towards putting something that's more positive and more relaxing together for those people that do like to fall asleep to these videos, instead of all of this kind of like heavy, intense, emotional, material. It'd be nice to have something that's a lot more soothing. So, so in the past week, the learning curves never end. So I've been trying to figure out Audacity and trying to find music and affirmations, and I was trying to record the different affirmations after I'd had like 3 or 4 cups of coffee. like, and I did not realize how fast I was reading them until I went to go play them back. And it was like the most unrelaxing, the most unrelaxing thing ever. It was pretty funny. So I need to work on that a little bit more. I hadn't ever realized how slowly people read when they are like on those affirmation videos that you see on YouTube. I didn't realize how slowly they go until I recorded it myself, and I it's I have massive amounts of respect for them now because it's a lot harder than you would think. So yeah, I should keep it because I should. Lauren was saying you should post those as a blooper reel. I totally should because they're like not relaxing at all. There's a oh gosh, an old Saturday Night Live skit with Will Ferrell. This was like a long time ago, and it kind of reminded me of that, where the skit was he was in this group that played meditation music, and they were like chimes, and it was just all like hippy dippy and super relaxing. But then Will Ferrell was like super type A. like, would freak out, and it was so funny because it was just that that polar opposite personality for what they were doing. So, and that was exactly how I felt with all that coffee in my system. So, okay, first last says Dana, different subject. How do you shield yourself at work from energy vampires? I'm too sensitive to watch the news. I'm like you. My pelvis hurts so badly. That's where energy vampires hurt me and steal my energy and power. So, okay, so what you can do is you can try visualizing. Well, there's a couple things, okay? So if you can't change your situation, which I would encourage you to see if you can transfer, switch your hours, do something, because life is really too short to just work with people that cause you that much stress. I realize that that's not always doable. I get it. But if it is, I would consider seeing what you can do to change the situation. If you can't change the situation and you have to make the best of it, then doing something like, envisioning a big bubble of white light around you where you're just keeping your energy and your happiness and within yourself, and just realizing that you don't have to respond to this person, you don't have to react, that their behavior is a reflection of them, and to just and continually trying to just visualize like sending them light and love, because honestly it must be absolutely exhausting to be them. I can't even fathom that. Like, I cannot even fathom a person walking around with that much bitterness inside and venom inside of them all of the time, and just the energy it must take to create that much drama on an ongoing basis is like, it's mind-boggling to me. So and another thing that you can do is, so when you're in bed for the night, so when you get home from work, you can take a shower and you can visualize yourself just really washing off the day, right? Washing off all of that negativity, washing off that energy. And then when you're laying down at night, visualizing yourself, thinking about the different people that you've been interacting with throughout the day, and imagining cords of energy going from you to them. And you can cut the cord, or you can imagine the cord. There's a couple other ways I heard about this, and I like these ideas. You could gently release the cord and visualize tying it to a balloon and having it just go straight up. So sort of like it would be connecting, it would be taking their energy and then visualizing it going straight up to source or to God or kind of their highest and best self. I know that sounds really hippie woo woo, but kind of like going, they're taking their energy and not just sending it back to them, but having it go up to a really good place, right? Or some people visualize taking those cords and sending like pink light or energy of any color back to them, and then just like letting that cord go and doing that with different people that you've interacted with, and sort of like you're just giving everybody's energy back to them, and doing that for a little while and see if that makes a difference. And then of course anticipation, right? So if this person's trying to drain your energy through like manipulation or through pot stirring or whatever, to just really steer clear, to make sure that you're engaging with them only bare minimum, that you're changing the topic if the conversation becomes gossipy or pot stirring or what have you. You know, anticipating and trying to plan ahead. So like if you're going to be in a meeting and you know that it's not going to go well, seeing if you can get up and go to the bathroom, or kind of what your escape plans can be to just get away and minimize your time with this really difficult person. So Cecilia says, I love the fox picture, Dana. Oh, I just scrolled past and I lost the thing. The rest of your comment. So yes, this fox picture back here, ooh, I'm knocking over my little bird, came from, and I should have written down the name that she wanted me to use. I think she wanted me to use the name Lynn, but it was from a person who's normally on the chat. I'll have to go back and reread the email and see how she wanted me to give her credit, because I don't want to say too much. But yes, she contacted me. She does graphics for different children's books. And yeah, she had emailed me and said, hey, I'd really like to do some drawings or donate some art or do something. And so we had talked about it, and the whole fox with grapes, where this comes from is the Aesop's fable is called Fox and Grapes. And in the Aesop's fable, the fox is trying to get the grapes and he can't. And so then, because he can't get what he wants, he justifies it. And so he says, well, I bet those grapes are sour. I don't want them anyhow. And so then he walks away. And really, the Aesop's fable is all about cognitive dissonance. It's how and why we justify, minimize, deflect, or deny. So because I'm absolutely in love with the concept of cognitive dissonance. It's so powerful. Like once we understand that concept, then pretty much everything in life makes sense. All of our behavior makes sense. And so the solution around cognitive dissonance is to deal with what is. So if we find ourselves justifying, minimizing, denying, deflecting, we're only postponing pain, right? And so growth comes from pain. Growth comes from facing what's uncomfortable and pushing through it. So that was kind of the concept of this drawing, was in order to actually get the grapes, in order to actually get what you really want, you have to deal with what is. You can't justify, minimize, deflect, deny. So yeah, that's the story of that. Let me scroll down a little bit here. Yes, Cecilia says, we often believe that the pain of leaving or cutting them out of our lives will be greater than the pain of staying. Yes. Yes, we do. And, you know, it's hard because, and I think a lot of it too, when we're in a relationship, right? So we have all of these bonding chemicals going on and we're attached to this person. And those bonding chemicals, it's almost, it kind of creates this attitude or this mindset of scarcity where we are like addicted. We're craving that specific person because that's kind of how we're wired, right? Women especially. So it's really hard for us to think that that there's other men out there, right? Or even men, that there's other women out there. We get this tunnel vision on this one person. And so, and I think this is why, in part, people say, well, there's more, there's more fish in the sea. And the best way to get over a broken heart is to go find somebody new. Is there's some truth to that. Not saying it's a good idea, but the truth in that is it shows a person that it gets them past that attitude of scarcity and more back into that attitude of abundance of there's many other people out there. You just have tunnel vision right now. Because if you think about it, every single relationship you've probably ever been in, I know for me, right? If it ends, you think about relationships you had in junior high or high school, they were devastating, right? They're always devastating. And we kind of think, well, we're never going to care about somebody like that again. And then we get into the next relationship. And then we think every relationship before the relationship we were in was just child's play. But this one is where it's at, right? And then if that one ends, then it's sort of like, oh, we're never going to love again. And then we get into another relationship and we think, oh my gosh, what were we thinking? That the other relationship was, again, it was child's play. It was not as great as we thought. So it's a lot of that kind of those feelings. It's chemical. It's keeping perspective with all of this and just realizing this too shall pass, and you know and really the truth is we bond with everybody differently, and all of our relationships are differently, and even if we've loved multiple people in our lives, we love them all differently. So you might not have that exact same connection again, but then the next connection you make with somebody might be just as intense in a different way, or it might be like outrageously better. It's got to keep perspective. Let's see. Let me go back and read here. Cecilia says, I'm feeling so much gratitude for the last discard. I don't know if you want it to come back, but I nailed the door shut and laid a brick in front of it. Good for you. Good for you. Right? And so, that's what we have to do with toxic people, and just kind of realize we don't have to be ugly about it. We don't have to have all of this animosity. Even though we might feel like it, we don't have to act like it, right? But we can just kind of be like, you know what? I wish you well, but from behind a closed door that I'm now going to nail shut. And if you're like Cecilia, you're also going to put a brick in front of it. So you just got to keep yourself safe and sane. Annie says, I've been no contact for over a year now, and I've never felt better. I've met great people. He was isolating me when I was talking to him. Yes. And so a lot of them do that. Emotionally abusive and manipulative people, they do that. And their number one tool is isolation. Abuse tends to happen in isolation, and it's one of their main ways of getting power and control over their victim and over the situation. And so oftentimes they will insist that either this other person doesn't, they might make it really difficult for them to have friends. They might flat out say, I don't want you having friends. They might be jealous. They might not want the person working, or they might want them working all the time. They might demand control over the money. They might be checking the miles on the car. They might insist that they go everywhere with you. Or if you do go out with friends, they're texting and calling nonstop. It's just this constant control over the situation. So let's see. Let me. Elise says, I'm afraid to go 100% no contact. I hardly have any contact with my ex, but he emailed the other night and I cried. I go gray rock with him, but I keep seeing him as nice. He's a covert narcissist. So it's hard, right? It's hard when you have that person that is the covert. They're the wolves in sheep's clothing, right? And they are very much the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality, and versus a lot of normal, other narcissists that tend to be more obvious. They're the more overt, more Mr. Hyde all the time kind of a person. And it's that cognitive dissonance. It kicks in, and it happens so quickly. It happens so quickly, and it happens to all of us, where we start wondering, well, maybe things aren't that bad. Well, there's a lot of good things about him, and maybe, and our brain starts to kind of justify it and them and our dynamic, and how it might be okay for us to reopen communication. But I always mention this in these videos. This is where that list comes into play. Where if you have that list of for when you miss him or her, right? And it's a bullet points of every rotten thing, every incredibly emotionally painful thing that they've done. You can go back and read that list, and it'll dissipate the fog of cognitive dissonance, and then you can see, oh, right, that's why I need to not contact them. So here's the second part of what you're saying. So you're afraid to go no contact. Sometimes going no contact isn't the best approach. And so only you know your situation best. And so sometimes if a person goes no contact, that can put them in danger. Because if you have an abusive person, because all abusive people, right, they're driven by power and control. If a person, especially if they've had power and control over this other person for any length of time, if the other person all of a sudden takes back all the power and control, and they're like, nope, we're done, no contact, and this and that, and locks are changed, and I'm calling, you're getting a restraining order, and they do all of this, that can really push them over the edge, and it really can trigger that narcissistic injury and really trigger that narcissistic rage. And so you know your situation best. And so if you're going to go no contact, but it makes you nervous, to realize that and to pay attention to those feelings, and to figure out, okay, if you feel like you need to go no contact, which is, again, like, it's not a bad thing. It's just one of those things it's something to keep in mind, that that can make the situation worse, right? So they might like triple up their efforts on trying to reopen contact, or they might start showing up, or kind of stalking behaviors. They're very unpredictable, but to just anticipate as much as you possibly can. So if you're going to stay going no contact, to just be aware of your surroundings, and to be, to be mindful of what, and to take everything that they're doing and saying seriously. So, because these kinds of people, they have a really hard time letting go. And it's that kind of personality type. Like, they just tend to hang on. So always, always, always go with your gut. Don't worry about if anybody else thinks you're overreacting or underreacting, or what have you. Go with your gut. Always err on the side of caution. I'd much rather you guys overreact than underreact. Right? So do what you feel you need to do, but to do whatever you're doing, you want to keep yourself as sane and as safe as possible. And I know it's hard, especially if they're continuing to contact you, and it's sort of like every single time you hear from them, it's like a knife in the heart. So with that said, this is when support groups can be really helpful, and talking to other people every single day that I'm in the support group, when I'm in there on and off, throughout the day, it's people, these are very common topics, right? Of this person's hoovering again. They're trying to reopen contact, and I'm really torn, and why do I still love him or her, and how do I handle this, and what's wrong with me, and how do I, all of these topics they're very, very normal, and it's so, I think, validating and reassuring to hear from other people in the group who've been there, done that, and have gotten through it. So it'll really help, I think, to get through those low moments, because we all have them, right? To turn to the group and just say, I'm having a hard time. This is what's going on today, and to just reach out for the people that get it. So. Tangeray says, does anybody deal with gifts and the narcissist? Well, narcissists are notorious for being terrible gift givers. Either they give no gifts, or they give bizarre gifts, or gifts that are not very thoughtful, or they give gifts that are late. It's just, yeah. If they do tend to give really great gifts, it tends to be attention seeking. So they make it a point to put it all over Facebook, to give gifts. And, if they're going to send you flowers, they can't just send you flowers, right? They've got to send you flowers at work, and they've got to send you lots of flowers at work, and really extravagant bouquets of flowers at work. So everybody can see what an amazing girlfriend or boyfriend you have. Everything when you're dealing with a manipulative person, everything is a manipulation. And we just have to kind of continue to remind ourselves that. Lady J says, Dana, do you think a narcissist's behavior is conscious? My estranged husband is a covert narcissist, and I have a hard time ascribing malicious intent to his bad behavior, even though it's clearly very unhealthy. So I had been going back and forth with this for a while, and because here's the thing, I think with some of them it is malicious intent, especially when you're dealing with more of like the psychopaths and the sociopaths. It tends to be a lot more planned out, and it's a game to them. Narcissists, I am not so sure. And so we're reading this book. This is going to be the book for, what month are we in? March? It's the book for April, and it's called Controlling People. It's by Patricia Evans, and I'll link down to it after the live stream's over. But it was really validating to start reading this book, because that book is based around that very question. And so I was so thrilled, because I just stumbled across it, that she was addressing this, because this is something I've wondered myself, because the relationships, and I've been in, I mainly talk about my relationships with Jack and Steve, but I've been in other relationships with other types of problematic people. And I don't think that they were aware of their behavior. So I don't think it was conscious. It really was very much that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Like, at any given time, there was only one person there. And the more stories I hear doing this channel, doing these live streams and everything, I've heard thousands, if not tens of thousands of stories by now. And I have to think to myself, well, this can't just be coincidence, because we're all describing different variations of the same story. So all abusive people tend to have this mind, well, mainly narcissists, I should say. Sociopaths and psychopaths don't really blame anybody for their behavior. They just don't care, right? Like they'll make up excuses, but they don't blame. Narcissists tend to blame other people. It's the whole look at what you made me do, right? Like you made me hit you, you made me do what. It's very childlike, their mentality. And so in this book, she talks a lot about that, and it's interesting because it's if you've ever read the book The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, he talks a lot about this. I hadn't connected it until I began reading the book on controlling people a few days ago, but it's the same principle. He describes it as the pain body. And so it's basically whenever we encounter this narcissistic injury, that our pain body surfaces. And I think he is absolutely right, and she is absolutely right that there's just it's this very it's like our brain downshifts into this like defense mechanism that kicks up. And because I've seen this before in other people that I've dated. I've seen this before when I was working at the domestic violence shelter. I've seen it at my work now. I've heard about it many times through other people's stories where it doesn't seem like this person is truly present, because they are so irrational that you can tell like they're being triggered, like they've got other things going on in their head that it's not happening. Sort of like the example that I gave earlier, right? Where you could say, hey, that's a nice pair of shoes. But in their mind, they interpret it as, oh, what? You don't think I'm entitled to spend money on a new pair of shoes? I give and I give and I give. And then they create this whole narrative about what you just said, and that was not even the case. Granted, we all might kind of do that to some extent, but we don't get abusive over it. Right. So we all might kind of make assumptions about what we think another person might have meant, or kind of what, sorry, my bangs are bothering me, or what have you. But, narcissists fly into a rage over this perceived narcissistic injury. That's generally not, it's not in reality. So I think those people that become very irrational, very out of the blue, especially when it's not provoked. No, they're not. I don't think that they are conscious of it. This is not to excuse their behavior, but it's weird, and it's frankly it's not studied enough. Like there really hasn't. I mean, people don't even really know what abusive behavior is. So the studies on it are really not there. But my guess is it's almost like it's a form of like cognitive dissonance where it's a defense mechanism. So that book Controlling People is really interesting, and I'll be curious to finish it. I think what I'm going to start doing too is I'm thinking, because I take really extensive notes on all of the books that we read for book club. I'm thinking that I might start turning my notes into a video. And then that way, if anybody wants to read the book, or they just want to listen to my notes, or I'll read my notes or what have you, and then comment, that could be a place where they can do that. So that might be a better way to have that discussion. I don't know. I'm rambling, so I'm sorry. I hope that answered your question to some extent. Okay. Looks like Ambiguous Nomad says, yeah, it's a good idea. First Last says, it's so true. Why is emotional abuse so very understudied, undervalued, and underaddressed? It's everywhere, and no one likes it except the ones doing it. I don't know. I've actually had this conversation twice now in the past like 5 hours. It's weird. It's I don't know. I don't know why abuse isn't more discussed, and especially emotional. But you know what though? Like even physical abuse. Like there's so many factors at play that just make me nuts. The image that most people have of physical abuse is of a female victim and a male abuser, and that the female victim is being abused because she's got a black eye and she's like huddled in a corner. That picture is a very small percentage of what abuse really is like. I mean, again, abusers use isolation. They use privacy. They abuse in secret. Abuse happens in secret, and so same with like physical abuse. It's generally physically abusive people, generally they pinch, they bite, they cut, they burn, they hit in areas that are covered by clothing. They very rarely go for the face, or go for places that the person can't cover up. So it's a stereotype, and it's not a very accurate stereotype. So that's frustrating. And then of course people walk around thinking, well, that they would be able to identify abusive relationships because the woman would have a black eye, but she generally doesn't. And then the whole, emotional abuse or verbal abuse, people think they know what it is. They think that it's, being called names or being yelled at. But even still, like, I think people tend to think it's more like being called names. But again, there's this idea that it's men talking to women that way. And I've heard women talk to children in horrible ways, name calling, yelling, putting down, belittling, and they're almost seen as good parents, which is really scary, right? Because it's not okay to talk to another living creature in general that way. To belittle or demean or to diminish in any way, shape, or form. It's not okay to talk to people like that. But a lot of people think, well, that's a good parent. That's a good parent. She really got in there and gave him, people, my God, like you go to the store, people are talking, I'm going to beat his ass and I'm going to give him a whooping and I'm going to wash your mouth out with soap, or they actually even do it, or things like that. Well, all of that is abusive behavior. And so, you know, and I know this is controversial because a lot of people don't have an issue with spanking, but I do. To me, abusive. It's if we're, if we're saying it's not okay to hit somebody, then it's not okay to hit, right? If we're saying it's not okay to threaten or demean or belittle another adult, then it's for sure not okay to treat a child like that. So if it's an act that can wind you up in jail, like if you were to go over to another adult and say, you know what, that is not okay, and you were to spank them, you would go to jail for that. So if you were to do this to a child, I think that's something to think about, because this is still a very kind of antiquated way that we go about, you know, trying to like teach children, but it doesn't teach them anything. If anything, it teaches them live in fear of their parent that they should love, not be afraid of, right? So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. But anyways, emotional abuse, yeah, it's not addressed. People don't know what it means. And here's the interesting thing with that. So a lot of people with emotional abuse that go through it, they don't even know that they're going through it. And so they might just grow up, and they might even be 50, 60, 70 years old before they're able to actually pinpoint kind of what happened, like what's going on. So it might be this kind of like low grade level of anxiety when they're around certain people. They might not be able to necessarily pinpoint why they feel like they're walking on eggshells. They might just feel resentment, anger, frustration, fear, distrust, these kinds of feelings of, unease around a certain person, but they might not know why. Generally, if that's the case, then it might be because that they've been abused in some sort of way, but what they experienced, they weren't thinking of it in terms of abuse. But yes, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on it. My whole goal with this channel is to shed as much light as humanly possible on these different topics of abuse. Because here's the thing with abusive behavior, Louise Hay says, we are all victims of victims. And there's a lot of truth to that. And so I think a lot of times people, we tend to repeat patterns. So we tend to repeat how we were raised. So if we were raised being spanked, right, or being yelled at, or being called names, or being harshly treated, then odds are, because a lot, like something like 90% of our behavior is all done on a subconscious level. So it's all of that early programming when we're children. So if we're not slowing things down and questioning our current behavior, then we're existing on autopilot. And so then we're repeating a lot of these patterns. And so it's it's good for us to slow things down and to examine our behavior, and to, but it's hard to break patterns if we're not able to identify, if we don't even know what abusive behavior is. But I think a lot of people, it's sort of like the whole red flag series, right? So like once people are aware of this is what problematic behavior looks like, it's like this huge light goes on. They're like, oh my God, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't tell exactly what it was. But then you point out, this is what, their lies look like. This is what gaslighting is. This is what silent treatment is. This is what these different types of problematic behaviors are. And again, a person doesn't have to be a narcissist to necessarily have all of these behaviors. They, a lot of, like I said, a lot of us, it might be how we were raised, and then we're subconsciously repeating a lot of these behaviors. But it's kind of one of those things, like once it's brought to our attention, then we now have the option of potentially doing better because now we know better. So, let's see, let me scroll down here. Yes, S9 says, I thought he was bipolar. I thought if he'd just get help, but nothing worked. So, yes, a lot of people I think do tend to think that this person is bipolar, because their behavior switches on such a dime, right? It goes from that Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde very, very quickly. And it's very nonsensical behavior, but that's, you know, um, if a person's bipolar and they're not medicated, and their mania doesn't, it doesn't, they don't run hot and cold like that. So there's personality differences, but they tend to, either be, manic or hypomanic. And so it's more of a lasting pattern of behavior that might get worse and worse and worse until they get medicated and they can get back on it. But with bipolar, medication generally does help. And so then it's because it's a chemical imbalance, right? And so once that behavior is leveled out and it's treated properly, then their behavior is, 9.95% of, out of 10 times is even keel. So, um, you know, but narcissists, they run very hot and cold. Their behavior changes on a dime, and there's no rhyme or reason for it. So, yeah, it's very, very strange behavior. Okay, first last says Dana, that outdated image and wrong education about abuse made me not realize I was being abused until just last year. I judged myself compared to extreme examples. I am so frustrated, sad, and I've wasted time. So a lot of people, myself included, do that, right? And so they'll tell themselves, well, but things aren't that bad, right? Or, well, but nobody's perfect. And you might even be hearing that same thing from other people, right? So again, because other people aren't identifying what's abusive, they might be telling themselves, well, it's only abuse. And I saw this in the domestic violence shelter too, where it's this idea of, well, he's just yelling at you, but he's not calling you names, or she, right? Well, okay, she's yelling at you and calling you names, but she's not hitting you. Okay, well, she's yelling at you, she's calling you names, she's hitting you, but she's not breaking bones. And so that line is always moving further and further back to fit, because a lot of people, they encounter their own level of cognitive dissonance, especially if they know the person. So let's say, for example, this abusive person is somebody that other people really like, that they can't fathom could possibly be abusive, like maybe a youth minister, right? Or everybody's favorite teacher, or the softball coach, or something like that. So there's this level of denial where people are like, there's no way that person's abusive. They are so funny and friendly, because people have this stereotype of what an abusive person acts like. And abusive people, most of them, oftentimes, especially the child abusers, are very friendly, are very likable. Most people do like them. That's how they're able to get in and actually effectively abuse children. So there's a lot of like re-education that needs to be done out there. I did not identify, my first abusive relationship was in high school. I did not identify that as abusive until about 20 years later. And nobody around me identified it either. I remember I was working at the domestic violence shelter, and we were sitting through domestic violence training and learning about like psychological abuse, and learning about stalking, and learning about how the patterns of abusive behavior goes. And I just started sobbing, because that was the first time I'd felt validated, and had really realized, yeah, I wasn't crazy. Like, the way I was so scared and terrified and irrational and confused was because I was being abused. And this is it didn't compute until I began learning more about what abusive behavior looks like. So, yes, I love that. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. So first last says it's the blind leading the blind for as far as labeling abuse. From now on, I'm the expert on what's abusive to me. I'm sick of deferring to others and looking outside of myself for what is normal and acceptable. Yes, I love that. So I think it helps to have an idea of kind of a framework of what exactly is abusive behavior. So and then maintaining our power and control over ourselves, because there's no shortage of well-intended bad advice out there, right? From parents, from friends, from family, from therapists, from ministers, from you name it, who may or may not be familiar with abuse, because lots of people aren't. And so a lot of people will turn over their power and control, or even worse, their sense of reality to a person. I've seen this a lot with therapists, right? Where people are like, well, I don't know what's going on. I'm going to this therapist to help me make sense of things. The therapist isn't familiar with different forms of abuse. Then they end up being re-victimized by the therapist, because the therapist is now siding with the abuser, because they don't understand, because they're falling into this idea too of, well, he's not abusive, he's here to work on your marriage, right? Because he showed up. So, but he's so nice, and look, and it's crazy making. So yes, go pay attention to how you feel. Pay attention to how you feel. Pay attention to how you feel. It's If those feelings of, again, like frustration, resentment, irritation, all of those unpleasant emotions, those tend to be a sign that your boundaries have been violated. And the more extreme those feelings are, there's generally you're experiencing more and more extreme boundary violations, which that's where abuse is, right? It's a boundary violation. So paying attention to kind of what needs to be reeled back in, and what is exactly going on, because if you're feeling like something's off, odds are it's because something's off. And yes, and to trust your judgment enough to where, validation by other people is nice, but it's not necessary. If you don't feel good around another person, it's okay to distance yourself to the place where you feel safe and sane. Maybe that means cutting them out of your life. Maybe it means spending a lot less time with them. It's your situation best. You know yourself best. And so Okay, so I think it helps to examine, okay, because there's a lot of forms of abusive behavior, right? But kind of at the core of it, I think it helps to examine, well, what is healthy behavior, right? Which is the opposite of abusive behavior. So what is healthy behavior? And it really boils down to healthy behavior is anything that's really, open, honest, sincere, solutions oriented behavior with thoughts, with feelings, with actions, with words. It's open, honest, sincere, solutions oriented. So abusive behavior is really anything that's the opposite of that, right? It's not it's not open, it's closed. It's not honest, it's manipulative or it's lies. It's not sincere, it's insincere. Again, manipulative, right? It's not solutions oriented, it's designed in order for them to win. So that's kind of a quick way for you to do a check to see what are you experiencing. Is it open, honest, sincere, and solutions oriented? It's really simple. It's either a yes or it's a no. And if you have to kind of really think about it, you're like, well, but it could kind of, if I squint my eyes and kind of try to make it fit, like it could be a yes. I guess it could be this. If you're having to work that hard at figuring it out, then odds are it's not healthy, whatever you're in. Because here's the other thing. The first sign of abuse is always confusion. Always. And so that confusion, that's the red flags, right? That's what we're seeing. Or I should say, that's not what we're seeing, that's what we're experiencing, because red flags, they're not seen, they're felt. And I think that's in large part why so many people tend to miss them. Because we all think we can see a red flag when it's being waved, but we don't see a red flag, we feel a red flag. And it starts off with that feeling of confusion. So paying attention to how you feel, and the more in tune you get with your feelings, and the more in tune you get with being able to verbalize and articulate what you're not okay with, the more you'll be able to pick up on problematic behavior, and you'll know exactly why. Because you'll say, you know what, that was really, demeaning, or that was very diminishing, or that was very, kind of invalidating. Like it was kind of gaslighting kind of behavior, right? Like we talked about earlier with the child with the skinned knee, how a parent or my brother with drinking rotten orange juice, and my father saying, well, no, the orange juice is fine. You just need to drink it. That's very invalidating. Did my father mean to invalidate my brother? Probably not. But it's it's something that once we know better, then we can do better. But um, you know, it's having that being brought to our attention and realizing that we can only speak from our experience. So if we find ourselves doing things like that, like, telling a child, "Oh, that doesn't hurt," when they're sitting there bleeding, right? That's crazy making. Like that's not nice to do to somebody else, to make them question their perception of reality, especially a child. So to say, yeah, if they're telling you that that hurts or that there's something going on, to validate that. So if a person's telling you, hey, I'm feeling really hurt, we might not understand why they're feeling that way, but that doesn't mean that they're wrong. It means that that's how they're feeling, and to listen to that. And so once we get more in tune with that, then we can examine our own part in that, and you know just, I don't know. I think the book Controlling People, she wrote another book that we read for book club, which is also fantastic, which I will do a video on that, on those notes. She's probably my favorite author at the moment. I just can't say enough good things about her and her insight. She's probably, in my opinion, out of all of the research and the work and the books and the experiences that I've come across and that I've read and that I've been doing, her name, Patricia Evans is her name. That lady knows what's up. Like she just knows her stuff. So the book, The Verbally Abusive Relationship, is the first book of hers that I read. It was Absolutely eye-opening, fantastic book. And she goes over, I think she lists out 15 different types of verbal abuse. And once you see it, it's one of those books that you read it and you almost want to start crying because it makes so many things make sense. Because it's sort of like, I never realized that was abuse, but then you read about it and you're like, yeah, of course that's abuse. Like, how could I not realize that that was not abusive? But again, this stuff isn't taught, so we're all kind of having to fumble along and do the best we can, right? So let's see. Okay, BBR says, did anyone have a brain fog when you were with a narcissist? Like all of a sudden you notice you're able to remember things. I've gone 3 months now and it seems like my memory is back to normal. I wonder why this is. So I think, well, it depends on the dynamic that you were going through in your relationship. If you're if you've gone through kind of what I think a lot of us have, it's a more of like that standard narcissist type relationship where there is a lot of that gaslighting, where it's all confusion, right? So if you, I mean, you could say, here's a picture of you, here's your mugshot from when you went to prison last week. And they're like, that didn't happen. I never went to prison. And you're like, but here's a picture. Like, here's a picture of you holding up the time and the date. And, like, here's your mugshot. And they just flat out deny it. So if you're with a person that's denying the truth, denying facts, that's crazy making. And so there's so much confusion and so much cognitive dissonance, and it's like your brain is short circuiting because it's like it doesn't compute, like nothing computes, right? And it erodes a person's sanity over time. So if that was the kind of stuff that you were experiencing, yes, it would very much so make sense as to why you know you're now being able to like regain trust in your discernment of events, and in more of a feeling of you know trust in your sanity and trust in your perception of events, because the narcissists, they're so manipulative and they just like they twist things, and they, like we talked about earlier, they really have like their own reality that we're not privy to, but they think that we are. They really think that we should know what they're thinking and feeling at all times, because they think that they know what we're thinking and feeling at all times. It's just their brains are just really wired differently. True Love says, Dana, what you said about how you go through waves of emotions and realizations the longer you go no contact is true. I'm 43 days no contact and doing better, yet for some reason I feel guilt over not trying harder with him. So that's an interesting choice of words there, guilt. Okay. So with guilt, here's my take on guilt. There's two types of guilt. There's appropriate guilt and then there's inappropriate guilt. And so appropriate guilt would be that you did something wrong and then you feel guilty about it, right? So for example, if I borrowed your shirt, right? And I wore an outfit of yours and then I put it in the dryer and it shrank, and I gave it back to you and I didn't tell you that I shrank it, right? I would feel guilty about that, and that would be appropriate guilt. Like that's something that would be appropriate for me to feel guilty about, because that's not cool, right? Inappropriate guilt is when we feel guilt over something that we did no wrong. And so a lot of people tend to feel this inappropriate guilt when they leave these types of relationships. And I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, these relationships are so one sided the whole time that we have felt for a very long time totally responsible for all of their feelings, because we were being told the whole time that everything is always our fault. And if that's something that you went through, then that would make sense, because they've probably been telling you, that we're the problem, that we're manipulative, that we're abusive, that we're the narcissist, that we need therapy, that, that we're the problem. And so when you're told that over and over and over again, especially when it's not based in reality, when you've done nothing wrong, then it's this feeling of, well, I should have worked on things more, because we might be buying into their reality that there is something wrong with us. And so, but the thing is, the reality is, with any relationship, it takes two people, and both of those people need to be solutions oriented. So, I get asked a lot. People will say, "Well, I feel like I should have tried more, right? Like, I really, maybe if I just hung in there, maybe if I could have gotten my partner to go to therapy." But here's the thing: a person's not going to change unless they're ready, willing, and able to change. So if they don't have a sincere level of accountability for their actions, and they're not wanting to take massive effort to repair the wrongs that they've done, if they're not willing to take massive action to work on the relationship, then nothing's going to change. And so all any of us can do at that point is to realize, to fully accept the fact that this person doesn't want to work on things. So we're in a one-sided relationship, because if we're solutions oriented, this other person isn't, we're not in a relationship. We're in a tug of war. It's a power struggle, right? So all any of us can do with that is to really walk away. But narcissists and other manipulative people tend to do a really great job at getting other people to buy into this idea that we're responsible for their emotions. We're responsible for the relationship, while they do nothing but start damaging it, right? That's all they do, is they damage it. And then we're responsible to continually pick up the pieces. And a lot of partners of narcissists, or targets of narcissists, tend to fall into that thinking of, well, maybe given enough time or love or therapy or rehab or kind of, church or what have you, that this person can change. But the reality is, a person's not going to change until they're absolutely ready to change. And you can tell that they're ready to change because they're taking consistent, massive action in the direction of change. So, holding your boundary and saying, this is what I'm willing to tolerate, that's all any of us can do. And so, whenever people will say, you know, they want to try therapy, they want to try rehab, they want to try these things, go for it. But I would encourage people to think about how much time, how much money, how much energy are you willing to commit to this relationship before you cut bait and drive on, to get a really clear idea. Because are you willing to spend 10 months or 10 years? Like, where in that are you? Because it really helps to get this idea of clarity in your mind as far as how long you're willing to hang in there. But again, a relationship, it's a two-way street. It needs to be, both people need to be solutions oriented. Dragging a person around to therapy, hoping that they're going to change, hoping that we can fix them, is not, that doesn't really work. So, yes. And you may feel this guilt about it, but realize that it's inappropriate guilt. If you've done everything that you could do, and if you're feeling guilty for having healthy boundaries, then that's not appropriate guilt. That's inappropriate guilt. And to free yourself of that, and to realize, I did what I needed to do in order to stay safe and sane. I did a good job of taking care of myself. This is what I'm taking actions to be healthy and to have healthy boundaries with myself. And I did a good job in doing this. So kind of reframing in your mind how your perception of all of this, if that makes sense. Okay, L says, if they used our bad sides, like traumatic childhoods, What would happen if we didn't have those? How would they have manipulated us? Would it be possible to work out that way? I'm not quite sure if I understand the question or not. If they used our bad sides, like traumatic childhoods, what would happen if we didn't have those? So are you asking, like, would they have been able to manipulate us if we hadn't had traumatic childhoods? Would it be possible for things to work out that way? Okay, so things will never work out with a manipulative person. There is no healthy dynamic, with a person that manipulates and lies, right? Because a healthy relationship is all about open, honest, sincere, solutions oriented communication. A manipulative person is the exact opposite of that. So that's a deal breaker. Like that, there's no working on that. Like that will get you nowhere other than hurt and heartache. As far as would they still have been able to manipulate us had we not had traumatic childhoods? Yes, very much so. I mean, they're manipulative people. And so manipulative people, I like to think of it as, they're going around kind of knocking on everybody's door and they're seeing who's going to answer. And so, sometimes people, their targets have traumatic childhoods, but sometimes they don't. Just like, for example, look at the people, the victims of Bernie Madoff, right? Who stole what, like billions of dollars? Did all of those people have, narcissists as parents? No. They got tangled up with him. He was a con artist. He told them exactly what they needed to hear, what they wanted to hear. He strung them along. The guy is a total sociopath. They got tangled up with him because he was able to manipulate them effectively. And, I've known many people that have come from, my grandmother was one of them, came from a really, good childhood. She just happened to be very naive. She had no idea that people like my grandfather existed. And, just did not see him coming at all. And so I think a lot of us, it's not that we necessarily got tangled up with narcissists because we had narcissists in our past. It's that again, this stuff is not taught. Like emotional health and healthy boundaries and signs of problematic behavior, this is not standard knowledge. And so, some people that get tangled up in this, yes, they have bad childhood. Some of them don't. It's kind of a flip of a coin. And so especially, like, let's say, for example, I see this a lot. This happened to me too, whereas if a person has, if they're coming from a relationship that is, let's say, very verbally abusive. So they're cruel, they're put downs, there's, kind of hurtful words spoken. They are going to be a lot more primed to go and do the exact opposite, right? That's how human beings are wired. We're wired to stay away from pain and to move towards pleasure. Makes total sense as to why we're going to avoid people that remind us of, an abusive parent or an abusive ex, right? Well, a lot of times people will then find themselves crashing into more of a covert narcissist who comes across like Prince or Princess Charming, right? They're very charming. They're very likable. They're like everything the person could want. And then that relationship turns out abusive. But the person didn't see it coming because they thought in their mind that an abusive person was cruel and, mean to the waitress and mean to kids and mean to animals. They didn't realize that a person could be nice to kids and nice to animals and still be abusive. So I think really honestly, a lot of it has to do with just this stuff isn't taught. So, and manipulative people will always find a way to manipulate. And so it's very important that we are aware of our vulnerabilities, and everybody has vulnerabilities, right? Whether it's our age, either we're young or we're old, or it could be our weight or our height or our appearance, or maybe we have children, maybe we don't have children. Like all of these things could be potential vulnerabilities. So it's good to know kind of what our potential vulnerabilities are, so we can see if we are, just to have it on our radar, not to be hyper vigilant, but if a person's, potentially targeting those. So let me scroll down. Yes. Okay. So BBR says, I like when what Dana says, that she wants to have a partner, not a project. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of a simple way to think about it, right? And, most people don't want to be fixed, right? Like, I mean, I think about myself. Yeah. I mean, there's things about me that are, I definitely need work, but I don't want somebody to date me thinking, oh, she would be really great if she cut her hair short and dyed it blonde and lost 40 pounds. Like, I don't want somebody thinking that I would be so great if I would just change, right? Or, oh, she'd be so great if if she wasn't so obsessed with, emotional health. Like, this is who I am. And so I think we all kind of feel like that, right? Like, we want to be accepted for who we are. And that's why it's so important when we're dating to really use that time to see, is this the kind of person that I really want in my life as is? Because most people, by and large, really don't change that much. So, um, you know, date for what is, don't date necessarily for potential. Okay, interesting. Elle asks, okay, but then aren't narcissists in a way good for us? They expose our bad sides so we can patch them. Otherwise, maybe we won't be able to see them. So that's a very, very interesting point. And in a lot of ways, yeah, that is kind of the upside to encountering a narcissist. And so, and that is a hard thing to even say out loud, because I think a person has to be at a certain place of understanding and healing in order to get something good out of it, because that's a hell of a way to learn a lesson. To have somebody just truly like destroy your life is nobody wants to sign up for that. But I think if you go into it realizing, okay, this happened to me and I'm going to make the best of it, because I'm not going to give this person or this situation the power to destroy my life, then we can back up a little bit and think about, okay, like what can I gain from this? Like, what gifts are in this? Because there's always gifts, there's always lessons in every single thing that happens to us. I can look back on what has happened to me, and it's been incredible as far as the personal growth that's been able to come from it. Not saying I want to go through it again, like by any stretch. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, but it is what it is, and I think you have to just kind of get out of it what you can in order to grow from it. And I think that is a big part of healing, is if you can find some sort of purpose from all of this pain, then it can help a person move out of the victim mentality to survivor to thriver kind of a mentality. But yes, oftentimes having a narcissist in our life, I kind of view it like they are the fire that we can no longer ignore. But odds are there's probably been a lot of smoke in our life before they showed up that we just have never noticed. So, for example, using my own life as an example, I've had a handful of really highly problematic relationships, and I did not connect it. I just thought it was all a fluke. And then I had these two, dated these two sociopaths almost back to back shortly after my divorce. And I couldn't figure out, I'm like, well, this is not a coincidence. Like, how, like, statistically speaking, like, how is this even possible to encounter two such crazy people. And then taking a few steps back and really examining my own, like, why I'd glossed over red flags, my own boundaries, my own standards, my own self-esteem, like what was going on with me, then realizing, oh wow, I have had a lot of really problematic people in my life my whole life. And that was, I just had never connected the dots before. And then starting to see the bigger picture of, yep, family members and friends and jobs and all of these things were in my life in large part because I didn't have healthy standards and healthy boundaries. And I was always kind of the people pleaser. I was always the fixer. I was always the caregiver. And so I had that mentality of, well, nobody's perfect and you just stick it out. And, you know, this really very codependent mentality of like, well, I'll sink myself in order to save you. And I didn't realize that that was unhealthy until fairly recently. And now that I'm starting to put the dots together, it's sort of like these relationships in many ways were almost inevitable. If it hadn't have been Jack and Steve, it would have been two other people probably, because I didn't see that I had these, you know, these things to iron out within myself. I didn't realize I had low self-esteem. I didn't realize that I had been settling for crumbs my whole life. I didn't realize this whole concept of empty buckets that I talk about before, where I'd kind of walked around my whole life feeling very unloved and very unimportant. And so that really primed me for being susceptible to people and friends too, to problematic friends and to problematic, you know, coworkers and problematic men, who gave me attention, who gave me affection, who made me feel loved and who made me feel important. Those were my vulnerabilities. And that was how I fell for it. I fell for it hook, line, and sinker, not realizing that I was falling for it because I didn't realize that there were such manipulative, horrible people in the world. And I thought that I knew that there were horrible people in the world, obviously, right? But I always thought I'd be able to see them coming. And so I was so caught off guard because I didn't see them coming. So lots and lots of lessons learned. But yes, it's a really hard way to learn this. And so this is kind of why I do this channel, is to share my experiences with the hopes that it'll prevent somebody else from making the same mistakes, because these conversations aren't happening and they need to be happening. It's important that they happen. It's important that we tell our friends and we talk to our friends and family and children and, you know, other people about this, because so much of abuse exists in secrecy. And when people go through stuff like this, they think they're the only ones. And there's a lot of shame and guilt and embarrassment and all of this stuff surrounding abuse, that it serves to keep people quiet about it because they're embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. It's embarrassing to say, this is what I went through. You know, this is how I got tangled up in it. You know, because then, you know, well, you guys know. So like, but keeping quiet about stuff like this isn't the solution. So shining a light on to all of this secrecy, in my mind, is the solution. So, great question, and I'm glad you asked it. I know it's a trigger question for a lot of people, but you know, I'm okay with talking about my experiences and yeah, and hopefully we can just learn as much as we can from the experiences that from mine and from other people that are willing to share theirs, and we can just drive forward. So, okay, let me scroll down. Oh, okay. Doug says, Dana, I'm the only moderator here. You might want to ask if anyone else wants to moderate. It's hard to read everything and keep up. Oh, I'm sorry, Doug. I didn't mean to put you to work. I'm gonna make a couple of you other guys moderators that have been here before. Hey, Randy's here. So Randy is now a moderator. Let's see. And Randy says, yes, no more crumbs. I think that has probably been the biggest lesson. I don't know. There's so many, like there's so many lessons in all of this. So Elle asks, Dana, how is your dating life today? How are your relationships? Aren't you too strict and maybe too much protective against other new people? That's always a concern of mine, that I am hypervigilant. But okay, so I was talking to a friend of mine who's a therapist, and she specifically does psychiatric assessments. So she's screening for personality disorders pretty much all day, every day. Like, she knows her stuff. She's been doing this for over 20 years. And I had talked to her a while back about this. And she's had her own history with problematic people and abuse, and I think we all really do. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a person who hasn't undergone abuse of some kind, frankly. But I was talking to her about it, and I said, that's my concern, is that how can I tell if I'm being hypervigilant or if there really is a problem? And she had said, she'd wondered that too, but she said, really, every single time I've thought something was off about another person, it was because something was off. She's like, just go with your gut. And she's absolutely right. Like, she's absolutely right. The different people that I've gone on a few dates with, I find, again, remember what I was saying earlier, the first sign of abuse is confusion. So it starts off with that funny feeling of, that's kind of weird. And then it's followed up by, is it me? Is it me or is it them? If you start finding yourself introspecting like that and wondering, is it me or is it them? Then it's them. Like 9.5 out of 10 times, it's them. If not like 10 out of 10. Because especially if you don't feel that way with other people, right? So yeah, I've had, I date. I think dating is a little bit more difficult the older you get, but I've had some good relationships, and I've had some relationships. I don't know. It's nothing like the they're getting better. I'll say that. How about that? They're getting a lot better. I'm getting more in tune with what I'm looking for, and my standards have raised tremendously. So, I really don't worry so much anymore about being too protective with people. The key really, it's to take it slow. It's to take it slow, because problematic people, or I should say problematic behavior, tends to surface within, you can tend to kind of see it like right away, really, but for sure within the first month. So it's really important to, wait to have sex, wait to get emotionally involved, take things slow, look at red flags, paying attention to how you feel, seeing if you can get, meeting with this person, in a group, so your friends are there, seeing how they are in different types of environments, and the better you get at spotting problematic behavior. And it's a skill. Like, you have to kind of get out there and meet people and all that, but the more you're putting yourself out there, the better you're getting. And everybody has their own line in the sand, right? So this is why it's so important, I think, to bring like your highest and best self to the table, because I think we tend to date the same level of function or dysfunction that we are. So if let's say, for example, if a person is an alcoholic, then odds are they're not going to have a problem with dating another person that's an alcoholic, right? Because they're an alcoholic, so they're probably going to think like, well, who am I to judge? right? Or they're going to think, oh, good, a drinking buddy, right? So but that's problematic, right? Because now they're partnering up based on like their same level of dysfunction. So it's, if you can bring like your highest and best self to the table where, you've kind of, again, not looking for a project, right? Like you're looking for a partner, where you've dealt with a lot of that stuff. You can hold your own. You've dealt with any, major stuff in your life, and you're ready. You're able to be open, honest, and sincere and solutions oriented. And you're going to find other people that are like that. But again, other people, manipulative people, are out there. They do a great job at talking the talk, but their actions will rat them out, like, in time. You just got to give it time for those actions to be seen. Yes, Brittany says, mine would pull the woe is me, but it was always to rope me back into his mess. Yes, so manipulative people will do that. And those of us that are, kind of have some more of those codependent type issues, we tend to fall for it, right? It's the whole kind of baby bird with the broken wing. And we just think, well, I'll save you, right? Like, I'll fix you and I'll help you and I'll stay with you through thick and thin, and that's not healthy, right? So yeah, it's good. It's good for us to know kind of what our weak points are, and where our empathy and compassion is, and to realize there's a difference between, a big difference between enabling another person and empowering them. So if we're taking actions, if our pattern has been to jump in and be like, I'll fix this situation or I'll fix you, that's a very enabling behavior. And enabling behavior doesn't help anybody. Empowering behavior does. So it's kind of the whole like Christian parable, right? The difference between giving a man a fish and teaching him to fish. It's, enabling a person is just it's a short-term solution to a long-term problem, versus like empowering them is encouraging them to stand on their own 2 feet and to figure out their stuff and to get into therapy or rehab or do whatever they need to do in order to be, their highest and best self. But realizing that only they can do that. Like, we don't have that power to carry anybody across the finish line. Like, they can only do that for themselves. Yes. Okay. BBR says, yes, confusion. When my ex narcissist's first red flag was him yelling at me for a very bizarre reason. I was just so confused at how he could feel so injured over something so insignificant. Yes. And so it's a lot of these signs, and they might be, hindsight is what it is, right? There's a lot of clarity that comes with hindsight. But in the moment, it's stuff, again, that feels like, that's so weird. Like, why is this person having this really extreme reaction to this seemingly insignificant event? So these are all signs that this person's got issues with power and control. They've got issues with their perception of events. And that's problematic. Hold on. Um, the stream is not being able to scroll very well. Oh, Susan says, is this over or is this in process? I don't see the comments being read. Are they to be read? This is live. There's a delay. There's like a 10-second delay. I read the comments as I come across them, but it's hard for me to read and talk at the same time. So when I'm talking, I don't read the comments, which means I probably miss a lot. So if you have a significant comment, I don't try to put it in all caps or something, and there's not a very good way to really try to capture my attention, and I apologize for that. I'm trying to do better at reading and responding at the same time. So let me scroll up a little bit here. Okay, Elena, great point. Says, I do not know what to do anymore. I couldn't find help for 3 years and it only got worse. 3 years ago, I realized that the only people I trusted and loved are covert narcissists and psychopaths. You're not alone in that. I think a lot of people come to that realization. A lot of the significant relationships in my life have been with kind of cluster B kind of people. And that's a really saddening and depressing realization of, wow, I don't know if I've ever really had a sincere connection with people. You know, like, and I get that. I get that. So, but again, I don't think that you're alone in that. At all. I think that's probably pretty par for the course. So, like I was saying earlier, that's the thing with narcissists. Like, when we have one of these really over the top relationships with a narcissist or a cluster B kind of personality, that the benefit of that is it brings it to our awareness of this is a problem. But where there's fire, there's generally smoke. And so there's probably been issues with us settling for crumbs, us having poor boundaries and poor standards for a really long time. Things were never this bad. And so now that they're this bad, we're kind of being forced to see the problem, right? But, it's the whole thing. Like, once we know better, then we can start doing better. And so realizing, okay, where are your vulnerabilities and how are these people getting into your life? And, kind of what, just kind of assessing yourself for your own vulnerability. It's like I'd mentioned earlier, right? So like my vulnerabilities that I went around walking around through life with the empty bucket of feeling, unloved and unimportant. Well, that made me prime for encountering people that made me feel very loved and very important. And emotionally manipulative people tend to come on strong and they come on fast. And so that's how I was getting tangled up with them, because a normal person doesn't move at a whirlwind pace, but a narcissist or a sociopath does. And so I was getting caught up with it because it was this instant gratification. It was sort of like I was starved out in these areas and they were just like laying it on thick and I was gobbling it up. But now that I'm aware of that, right, I can spot that whirlwind friendship or that whirlwind romance as the problematic behavior that it is, because healthy people don't ever move at that pace. And so I can slow things down a little bit more and realize, okay, this is a potential vulnerability of mine. I need to make sure to work on filling this bucket on a regular basis, which means making sure I'm spending time with friends, making sure I'm volunteering, making sure I'm kind of doing whatever I need to do in order to feel important and to feel loved, right? And generally, that for me, that means being around other people. So if I'm able to fill that bucket on my own, then I'm able to see that love bombing, that whirlwind kind of rushing of intimacy for what it is. And I think once you kind of realize too, like, what are your empty buckets? Kind of how, like, what is so attractive about these people? Once you're able to spot that, then you're able to kind of slow things down to where you're not going to be so inclined to get caught up in it, because you're going to see it. You're going to see it as problematic earlier on. So, let's see. Trisha's here. It's her first time on the live stream, so welcome. We have over 100 people on right now. That is so cool. Yes. Chetty says, this is a true quote. Once a narcissist loses control of you, they start trying to control what people think about you. Yes, this is very, very true. They do this. And so this is called, there's a term, flying monkeys and smear campaigns. And we'll talk about this in a second. Doug is signing off. He's going to bed. And so good night, Doug. Thank you so much for joining us. And let's see. Susan says, oh, what was the title of the book? The two books I talked about tonight, well, actually three. Um, the two by Patricia Evans were The Verbally Abusive Relationship, and then the other one was called Controlling People. And then the other book was by Louise Hay, and it's called You Can Heal Your Life. So, fantastic. Oh, Adrian is saying I'm ignoring him on Periscope. I am so sorry. I had kind of forgotten I had Periscope going. So I'm sorry, Periscope people. I am still getting used to going back and forth here. So, yes. So the way that emotionally manipulative people do tend to try to control the situation or control people's perceptions is through flying monkeys, is through a smear campaign. Again, like how we talked about this a little bit earlier, is I think a lot of them really do feel like the victim. And so, you know, they feel like, because again, they feel justified in the way that they treat us, but it's because they have spun things around in their mind to where like they're not in reality. Like they live in this bizarro flipped reality that we're not privy to. It's very, very strange. So that's why they're so convincing. And when they're creating these flying monkeys, but again, like there's two different types, right? Like a lot of, they're either in their own reality or they're con artists, which is the manufactured reality. So in my opinion, there's two different types of emotionally manipulative people going on there. But you don't know what you're dealing with. And frankly, it doesn't matter because the outcome is still the same, right? But anyhow, yes, the flying monkeys and the smear campaign. So they kind of rally everybody up to start attacking you. It's abuse by proxy is what it is, because it's this whole concept of they're the victim, and they basically start telling everybody that now you've done everything that they've done because they've projected all of their bad behavior onto their victim. Very, very strange, very damaging, very crazy making, very frustrating. Okay, S9 says, Dana, some want the books listed in the comments at the end. Okay, I will do that. I won't be able to do that till tomorrow morning because once I shut down the live stream, then it takes like a few hours to process. And so, but I'll do that in the morning. Isaac says, Dana, I had a friend that muttered hurtful things under his breath. For a long time, I questioned myself. These were bizarre, hurtful jabs I weren't sure were even real. I believe it. It's very strange when we encounter that. Or they'll say something and then deny it and say, like, well, I never said that. And it's like, yeah, you did. Like, you just said, XYZ. And then that's a form of gaslighting. And gaslighting is a term that comes from an old movie, where basically the main character in the movie is trying to erode his wife's sanity by telling her that she's crazy, she's mentally ill, she needs to be committed, because and he's doing all of this intentionally because he's trying to get away with stuff. But narcissists do the exact same thing. Yes, lack of accountability is the primary trait about narcissists. There's no sincere accountability of their actions. Okay, Susan wants us to discuss covert narcissists. So, okay, actually got two really great questions here. So let's cover this one. So there's two kind of main types of narcissists out there. You've got covert, and you've got overt. And so the overt ones are overt means more obvious. They're kind of like that guy or like that girl at the party, right? They're the very, just schmoozy, over the top, larger than life. They talk nonstop. It's all about them. They're kind of like that Johnny Chachi kind of guy who's got the hair and the car and the spray tan and the designer everything, or that girl who's the female version of Johnny Chachi, right? So the overt narcissists tend to be a lot more obvious. Like people roll their eyes when they even talk about them. Like, oh my God, like not that person. They're so ridiculous. Covert narcissists tend to be the exact opposite. They're the wolves in sheep's clothing. And they're the ones that are they come across as very humble and kind and compassionate, but deep down it's still that same drive. It's still all about power and control. It's all about them. It's this blinding degree of selfishness. The covert narcissist, their selfishness tends to be discovered when they get caught for something. So like they might get caught having an affair, multiple affairs. They might get caught embezzling money from their company. They might get caught, with this kind of behavior. But the covert ones, it can be very crazy making because they do such a good job at being that wolves in sheep's clothing, and they oftentimes do a good job at lip service. So they might say all the right things to get their partner to continue to give them chances, but they never ever change for long. Whereas like the overt narcissists, those are more of like your kind of stereotypical narcissists. They don't apologize. It's never their fault. They're very grandiose, very entitled. Again, the covert narcissists come across the exact opposite way. So, if, like, for example, my grandfather was a covert narcissist. He was a minister of a church and cheated on my grandmother every chance he got. I mean, to the point where they were like run out of town. I mean, he was, banished or whatever you'd call it from multiple churches. And so my mother grew up, they hardly ever had any money. It was all about him. He would do things like he didn't have, people would leave groceries on their doorstep. And where my grandfather would go out and he'd buy a brand new suit. Or my mom told me this one story. He came home one time and bought a brand new car and didn't even tell anybody. Didn't tell my grandmother. And here she is, like, scrimping and saving, and the kids have nothing. They have nothing. I mean, neighbors, people are leaving food on their doorstep, and he's out, with a brand new car and womanizing, and I mean, just like he would even bring these women home for dinner that he was having affairs with. Like jaw-dropping behavior. So he would be an example of a good covert narcissist because he had a ton of people fooled for a really long time. They thought because he was very witty, he was very funny, he was handsome, he was charming, and so people they didn't see him coming. They thought he was this really great minister, and he wasn't. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing. He was very much a predator. Very emotionally abusive, very, financially abusive, very just, psychologically just terrible. Okay. Elle asks, great question. How do I know that I'm not a narcissist myself? I have a few of the red flags, and in the past I mistreated some people, which emotions I didn't even consider. Later, I started to think about that. So, here's what I tell people with the whole label, because narcissist, it's a label, right? And it's not and personality disorders, psychology in general, it's not a hard science. It's not like math or science where you have these tests and you can have a verifiable, repeatable result. So psychology in general is considered a soft science. It's not a hard science. So it's more of an art, okay, with trying to figure all of this out. So these different labels like narcissist, sociopath, or now called antisocial personality disorder, all of these things are just terms that really describe behaviors. So the terms, the labels themselves aren't as important because the labels change. Okay. The labels aren't as important as the behaviors that they point to. And because they point to a lot of behavior that a lot of people could fit into, right? So it's not so much, and different people have different kind of problematic behavior at different points in their life, right? Like if a person's an addict or an alcoholic or in a bad relationship or kind of whatever, they might have a lot of problematic behavior. So, what matters most is if a person has a sincere desire to do better and they're actually taking effort, making effort to do better. So, if you're thinking to yourself, wow, in my past I was really a big jerk. I cheated on my girlfriend, or my boyfriend, or I used to lie a lot, or I used to steal, and I had this kind of behavior, and I'm not proud of it, and I want to change this. Then by all means, go and change it. If you feel like you're capable of changing something, then go for it. What's problematic about narcissists and sociopaths is there is no desire for them to change their behavior. They are who they are, and narcissists tend to not see it. They don't really ever think that they have the problem. It's always everybody else has the problem. And sociopaths, con people intentionally. So they know what they're doing. They just don't care. So if you know what you're doing and you do care, then there's no problem because now you can work towards changing it. So I hope that answers your question. Um, let's see. Let's see. Believe in Love says, Dana, can you discuss what happens after you wake up from the disassociation from trauma? Well, let's see. And I hope I answer your question. I hope I answer your question as far as like what you're getting at, because I'm not 100% sure if I understand what you're asking there. But so a lot of people with the whole like disassociation from trauma, people tend to not realize that they're being abused. And it's not necessarily because they're disassociating from it. It's just that this stuff is not discussed. And so when people, and again, abuse happens in isolation, right? So the person that's being abused doesn't have any validation as to what's going on. All they have is the abusive person's reality. So if the abusive person's telling them, you're not being abused, give me a break, or they're telling them the exact opposite, they're gaslighting them, then the victim doesn't, there's so much confusion going on that they might be being abused, but they might not realize it for decades. And so it's not necessarily disassociation, it's just that they're not properly identifying it, which is really, really common. Down the road, when they start putting two and two together, and then they start realizing, yeah, wait a minute, like that really was problematic behavior, that really did happen, this is what was going on. And then there's a whole tend to be a whole mix of emotions. It's confusion, it's shame, it's guilt, it's oftentimes suicidal feelings, it's embarrassment, it's feeling stupid, like how could I not know that this wasn't abuse. You know just it's a ton of a mixture of emotions, especially if the person is being abused by a parent. Like, I hate my mom, but I love her because she's my mom. So there's all of this confusion over, well, how can a parent treat me like this? Or how could, a spouse or a child, how can somebody treat me like this? And I've done nothing but be good to them, and they're doing this. And so it's a wide mix of emotions. Um, and it's normal to feel that wide range of emotions because it's a confusing situation, and it takes time to put all of the different pieces together, you know and that's assuming a person can get a therapist who's skilled in abuse, because a lot of them aren't. They might think that they are, but they're not. So that can be even more crazy making and even more invalidating. And it's hard, but man, I tell you, if you can find a therapist who's skilled in abuse, they are worth their weight in gold. It's like finding a good professional in any field, right? It's like it's finding a good attorney or a good realtor or a good, investment banker. It's if you can find a good one, they're awesome, but you have to sometimes weed out a lot of them because there's a lot of, just kind of not so great ones out there. Um, yes, that's a good one. Shetty says dealing with the narcissist is like getting on a roller coaster and never getting off. Yes, I would agree. I would agree. You never know. You never know with what you're dealing with because they don't even know because they're Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Um, Okay, let's see. Ambiguous Nomad says, Dana, can you speak a little bit on detachment, especially emotional detachment? Anything that can strike a nerve and make them think they avoid. Um, I'm speaking about my codependent siblings. Well, so narcissists defend their behavior, and so codependents do too. And I think it's hard for a lot of codependent people to see that there's a problem with their behavior because a lot of codependent behavior is really heralded as a good thing, right? Like we're taught that it's good to be giving, it's good to put other people first, it's good to, treat others like we would want to be treated, right? So there's a lot of kind of these different social mores or social pressure or social constructs to be have character traits that are more on the codependent side of the spectrum. And so a lot of codependent people, when they're told, hey, it's you've got to love yourself first, right? Or you've got to say no, or you've got to have healthy boundaries, to them, and I speak from experience, it's this feeling of they're so like wildly offended by that. It's like, wow, that's narcissistic. That's selfish. Like, because we tend to be used to we put ourselves last because that's what we think we need to do. And to do anything else doesn't feel right. It feels very self-serving and very toxic and very selfish. And, you know, so it's hard waking up a narcissist to say to tell them that they've got a problem because they don't think they have a problem. Well, the codependent person oftentimes doesn't think that they have a problem either. They have a hard time throwing in the towel. It's kind of this whole idea of commitment at all cost. Well, this person might be an alcoholic and they might be molesting their children and they might be beating them and they might be doing all these terrible things. But in the codependent's mind, it's, this is what commitment's all about. Like, we will get it figured out. I will stand by you through thick and thin. I took vows, and they take these things very seriously. Whereas if they're with a manipulative person, the manipulative person doesn't take any of this seriously, right? So, the emotional detachment of it all, and it's hard. It's hard because they're probably not going to hear it from you because you're related and you're a sibling, and all of their defenses are going to go up immediately. So, you know, boy, it took me quite a while to really even consider the fact that maybe I had some issues there because we are our own baseline for normal, right? So if we've been living our whole life a certain way, and especially if society is telling us that it's good, right? Like it's good to put ourselves last, it's good to think of others first. We just don't see it. So, um, it's hard to wake somebody else up. It's, you know, I think all you can really do in that situation is to distance yourself from the toxicity of it all, and just do whatever you need to do in order to keep yourself sane and safe. And realize that you might not be able to wake them up. you know you can try giving them like links to a support group, or like a link to a channel like this, and see if they're willing to even watch a few videos. Odds are they're not. So here's the thing with codependence, right? So most codependent people tend to not get into therapy. They don't think that they have the problem. We don't think that we have the problem. We think that we have a ton of really kind, good, loving, good behavior, right? We're not the problem. The problematic person's the problem, right? So codependent people tend to only get into therapy because they want their partner to be fixed. So codependent people they're wanting to understand narcissists. They're wanting to understand their problematic partner. It takes them a long time. It took me like 6 years to really examine, my own issues, my own part in this. And even then, I kind of feel like I went kicking and screaming because it was like I just did not see it. So most codependent people, like, so narcissists and a lot of addicts and alcoholics tend to not think they have a problem until they hit rock bottom. And then the codependent person's begging them to go to therapy to get them fixed. But most people aren't ever dragging the codependent person into therapy, right? So it's, there's like so many different levels of crazy making there. I don't know. I have to think about that a little bit more, and like how to more effectively get through to codependent people, because and that's another word, like even the word codependent, just like the word sociopath, just like the word narcissist, a lot of these words that have to do with emotional health and healing and understanding all of this, these words are really broken, right? So for me, I thought for the longest time, a person that was codependent was really a doormat, and they really had no boundaries or standards. And I didn't consider myself to be to that level. So I didn't identify as being codependent. Well, just like with narcissists, like, there's a spectrum of problematic behavior, right? Just so codependency, there's a spectrum of codependency. I didn't realize that. So I don't think I'm probably not alone in that. I think a lot of people might have this idea of kind of what a codependent person is, or they might think to themselves, well, I'm not codependent. My significant other is not an addict or an alcoholic. Because the term codependency originated with alcoholics, with spouses of alcoholics. So they might have their own preconceptions of what this term means. So again, a lot of this terminology is just really broken. Yes. So Stephen says, interesting how the narcissist codependent pair see the other person as the problem. It really is so fascinating as to how that goes, isn't it? And and not only do they see them as the problem, so like codependent people, we tend to project all of our good qualities onto others, and especially the narcissist, right? We're holding on to hope that eventually that they'll have this breakthrough because we see all of the good in them, and narcissists project all of their bad onto us. Very interesting how that happens. So yeah. Oh, okay. S9 says, Dana, could you talk about EMDR and CPTSD? So, the I'm not super familiar with EMDR. They, I am familiar with what is it? The tapping? Is it EFT? The tapping therapy. I have a friend of mine who's a therapist who does that. She swears by it. She just loves it. Like, that is her thing. And there's YouTube videos on it. You can do it yourself. It takes all of about 3 minutes to learn. and you're tapping different like meridians, like different pressure points on your face, and then you repeat certain things. And it's like I said, it's very very easy to learn. It's you know, you can't do it wrong, kind of a thing. And it's and it helps to supposedly release trauma very quickly. I don't fully understand the science behind why it works, but frankly, it doesn't matter, because if it works for some people, then it works. And even if it's psychosomatic, as long as it works, then, you know, then that's good. But yeah, okay, so Lavinia says, I was a codependent. Now, just because I'm learning how to show boundaries, a fake friend thinks I'm a bad person. So, yes, let me scroll up a little bit. So, that's the thing with setting boundaries, right? So now you're changing the dynamic of a relationship. So if a person is used to you being there around the clock, whatever they need, right? And all of a sudden you're saying, you know what? Hey, I go to bed at 9:30. I turn my phone off. I'm not going to answer. Please don't call after 9:30. They're going to be horrified. Well, how dare, like, what? Especially if they have some codependency too, right? So if their mind, they would be like, well, my gosh, I would answer the phone if you needed anything at 2, 3, 4 in the morning. I'd be there for you. You know, they don't do well with setting boundaries, because codependent people tend to think that it's not okay to have boundaries. And of course, the opposite end of the spectrum, people that are more the emotional manipulators, aren't okay with us having boundaries either, because then they can't manipulate. So just realize, the people that are going to stay in your life, that are going to grow with you, are going to grow with you, because you are going to grow and change as a human being. And they're going to be okay with you setting boundaries. And if they're not, then they need to go, because it's okay. It's healthy and it's okay to have boundaries for what you will and won't accept into your life. Let's see. Let me scroll up here. Yes. Okay. So Ambiguous Nomad says, as soon as I read up about codependency, I said, this is me. It explained so much. I wanted to know more. And so interestingly enough, I had the exact opposite experience. I read the book Codependent No More. It did not resonate with me at all. I was shocked. And I need to go back and reread it, because I have found that it's one of those things, like when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And there's been a couple of books, like Louise Hay's book that I freaking love now, the You Can Heal Your Life. The first time I opened the book, I hated it. I thought it was awful. It did not resonate with me at all. I read about maybe 10% of it and I put it down. And I picked it up again, you know, fast forward, you know, 6 or so years later, and I loved it. And I couldn't believe how I could have such a very different response to the same book. So I'll have to read Codependent No More and see if I perceive it differently. But at the time I thought, this is not me. Like nothing clicked. But I am working on a series on codependency that's going to start the first day of spring, which is the 21st. So it's going to start next week. And that's going to be probably wind up, I'm guessing, probably being about the same length as the Red Flags of a Narcissist series. So probably about 50 or so videos and all. And I'm actually not even done with the Red Flags of a Narcissist series. There's still about 20 more videos that I want to make. I just kind of ran out of steam. And yeah, so it'll be good. And then we're going to be talking a lot more about that, and about boundaries and standards, and all that. So, okay, that's a great question. Elle is full of great questions tonight. Says, what did your therapist tell you about codependency and how to fix it and how to stop being it? So the I'd seen several different therapists after, you know, I went through a divorce, and then I went through, which my ex-husband was a a very nice man. We had nothing in common though, and he was very, in my opinion, very kind of like emotionally just detached. He was very good to me, but it wasn't there was no click. So then I had these problematic relationships all within a span of, like 4 or so years of each other, 5 years. And I think it was like a second or third therapist I saw had mentioned something about codependency, and she brought it up like right away. And I remember getting really upset by it because I thought, well, you don't know me. You don't know the situation, because my dynamic with Jack and Steve is that they were both Prince Charming. There was no obvious devalue stage done to my face. And then I found out about their double lives and the nonsense, and then everything like went to like Lifetime TV movie. So I thought, well, no, it's not like I put up with a bunch of stuff with them. I didn't feel like I was being treated like a doormat. I was the exact opposite. I was being treated really well. And they happened to just be like emotional con artists. So it didn't resonate with me. I felt like it was, I didn't feel like I had issues with codependency. It wasn't, I don't even know. A coworker of mine who's also big into personal growth, she was online and we were looking around. She was looking at articles and had sent me an article on boundaries and like standards and stuff. And then it was kind of, I don't know, it was just like that one day it kind of clicked. And I thought, yeah, you know what? I do a lot of this stuff. I settle for crumbs. I feel I have a hard time saying no. I feel uncomfortable when somebody violates a boundary, right? Like, so if a guy is inappropriate with me, I feel uncomfortable for him. I feel bad for him. I want to protect his feelings when really I'm always putting myself last. So once that was kind of brought to my attention, I began doing better. So that's kind of been the solution for me, is just bringing that to my awareness. And I think that's the solution for everybody, right? It's sort of this idea of once these things come to your consciousness, because a lot, 90% or so of what we do is based off of our subconscious. It's these old patterns that we repeat. Once that's brought to our consciousness, then we have a fighting chance, right? Then we can spot these problematic behaviors for what they are, and we can actually start working to change them. And so, I think you'll find, like in my series on codependency, and it's just like with the whole narcissist thing, like once you start seeing, kind of like demystifying what you went through, and you're like, oh wow, yeah, like I experienced that and that and that and that, and you start connecting the dots. It's sort of like, if you've ever this is gonna like really age me here, but if you've ever played that game Minesweeper, where like you're clicking the different blocks or whatever, and then all of a sudden it goes boom, and then like this whole area opens up. It's kind of like that. It's sort of like you're making these connections one at a time, and then boom, like all of a sudden this whole area opens up and things make a lot more sense. That's how kind of codependency works too. But the good thing is there's no such thing as small change. Like change always has a ripple effect. So if you realize that you've had maybe some weak boundaries or poor standards in one area, then you're going to start realizing, and then you improve those, you're going to start improving them in different areas too, even though you might not intend to. Like there's just kind of this ripple effect. So if you keep moving in this positive direction, it's sort of like this trajectory of a line, right? Like you don't need to make a ton of massive changes. If you just make a few changes, over time, that line, that trajectory goes up, and you're going to be at a very different place in, 6 weeks or 6 months from now. You just kind of, you just keep going. So, but a lot of it was, I think it's interesting to examine our past when it comes to these things, but I don't think that the answers lie in our past. I think that the solutions are always in the moment. So I think a lot of people get kind of tangled up and they get stuck in therapy for decades examining their navel, right? They're examining their past and their dynamic at this one time when they were 6 years old and with their, and like we can rehash the past to pieces. To me, it's more important to examine kind of where we are today and to be more future oriented with, like, okay, now what? Now what? So, let's see. Trisha says, it's been wonderful becoming aware of my subconscious. It feels like I'm getting my free will back and I'm not just behaving based on subconscious programming. Yeah, it's very powerful once we start really realizing, um, what we're doing when we start all of this behavior that's not serving us, right? That's working against us. When it starts coming into our conscious mind and we start realizing, oh wow, like wait a minute, I don't want to be doing this, and we start working towards replacing that behavior with something else, because that's really kind of, I think, probably the most efficient way to do it, to make change. Is replacing something that's destructive with something that's constructive, right? It's really empowering when we start having these aha moments. So yeah, good times. Personal growth is so cool. Like it's so fun, and I wish there were better ways than, going through a bunch of pain and hurt and heartache in order to reach these moments, but I think sometimes it takes that to bring it to our attention. Martine says, I'm at the point now, Dana. I feel ready to work on my codependency issues. I want to learn more. So I'm excited. I feel the same way. And so, this whole series that I'm going to be doing, I will be really curious as to everybody's feedback. And because it is kind of a hot topic for a lot of people, because a lot of people feel like there's a lot of, victim blaming that goes on. And I get it, because I felt the exact same way for a long time. It was sort of like, I had no part in this. I was conned. I was manipulated and I was conned. And that is very true. But it's the whole thing. Like, it's not our fault, but there might be other stuff going on there that's worth examining. And so that's kind of the whole concept of my series on codependency. Of, again, I'm not a fan of the labels. I think these words are really broken, and so I don't want anybody to feel like they have to use the word codependent or use the word narcissist, or that they need anybody, really, me or a therapist or anybody else, to define their experience. That it's okay for you to keep your power and control over how you perceive yourself, over how you perceive your experience. But I hope that we can really open up the conversation about all of this and see what kind of aha moments we can reach. Because my series on red flags of a narcissist, I mean, I'll tell you, it's really been a wild ride, because that series, it started off really, I was thinking it was going to go one way and it went a totally different way. And I'm so glad it ended up going the way that it went, because you know, I have learned an absolute ton. And I think a lot of other people have too, but it's because everybody chimed in. Everybody gave their input and really helped to make it into this whole learning experience that's been what it's been. So we'll see. We'll see. The series is going to start next week, and it'll I think it'll be really eye opening for all of us. Let's see. Let's scroll down. Oh, I just scrolled way too far. Martine says, angry and resistant to change, and I am a living testament to that. It's so hard to break my bad habits. Yeah, it's It's hard. It's hard for all of us to break bad habits. It's because we're kind of living on autopilot, you know. And I think it's important too to realize that every single thing that we do it because it serves a purpose. Like it's meeting some sort of need. It's either meeting a physical need or it's meeting an emotional need. And if we can kind of look at our behavior in that way, it's it's our behavior is never bad, right? Like a person doesn't become an alcoholic or they don't develop an eating disorder because they're thinking, oh, I'm going to be bad. There's some sort of motivation behind that. It's a way of numbing out, or it's a way of coping, or it's a way of dealing with anger or dealing with hurt, or trying to gain control over their lives, or there's a purpose for it. And so if we can kind of be kind to ourselves and examine our behavior through the lens of what need am I trying to meet by doing this? And take away all the judgment and the guilt and the shame and the punishment and the feeling like we just lack willpower or discipline or whatever, and realize everything we're doing is meeting a need. So if we can figure out what need we're trying to meet and then kind of crowd out that behavior, that maladaptive behavior, with something that's positive, that's meeting the same need, that deconstruct that destructive behavior will eventually go away because it's not needed anymore, because it's been replaced by all of this other positive behavior. Where I think a lot of people have a hard time, where they get stuck, is they'll just stop doing something. So a lot of people, let's say, for example, if they're an alcoholic, they might just stop drinking. Well, that's great, but they haven't learned how to fill that drinking was meeting a need, right? So now they're not getting that need met. They're going to find another way to do it. This is why addictions tend to run in threes, right? So it's important to substitute out. So like, for example, if a person's trying to quit smoking, they might gain weight, right? That's really, really common. Or they might start chewing gum, or they need to do something besides they need to replace that one habit with another habit. And so, kind of thinking about, like, well, what could you replace these habits that you're having a hard time breaking? Like, what positive habits could you replace them with that you really enjoy? Not habits that you think you should do, right? But habits that you really truly enjoy, that meet the same need. Gosh, I keep scrolling past the chat. Okay, Ambiguous Nomad says, Dana, yes, my sister believes her eating habits are just because, instead of realizing it's a coping mechanism from dealing with a narcissist mother who she thinks is the greatest person ever and living in an overall dysfunctional environment. Yeah, well, I think it's a lot of it's denial, you know. So, a lot of people, right? Like, we justify, we minimize, we deflect, we deny, especially any type of behavior that's not seen as socially acceptable, like an addiction, like alcohol, like an eating disorder. But and it's hard because you can have all these different siblings being raised by the same parents around the same time, and each sibling is going to have their own perception of their parents and their own relationship with their parents. So, like, and especially if the parent's a narcissist. So, you know, it's it's really common. So, for example, with narcissists, they might have one child who's the golden child, and then the other child who's the scapegoat. So this was an example of my mom. How she grew up. So my aunt, her sister, was the favorite. So my aunt was the golden child, and my mom was kind of the scapegoat. She didn't get the brunt of a lot of stuff, but all of my grandfather's attention and money and time and everything went to her sister, and she just got crumbs of whatever was left over. So it was very painful for her. So she had a very different perception of her father than my aunt has of her father. So that's something to keep in mind too. I must have missed something 'cause it looks like somebody just banned a troll and everybody is like celebrating over here. So, you guys are funny. Let's see. Well, I'm gonna have to call it a night here pretty soon, you guys. Any other? S9 is still talking about the banning the troll. So excited. You are a troll stomper. That's yeah, it is kind of this little surge of victory, or I'm not even sure what you'd consider it, but I know that feeling of getting rid of trolls is a good one. Ambiguous Nomad says, "Yes, Dana, I'm the scapegoat in the family. They don't understand." Right. They don't understand. They had a very totally different perception and different experience and everything of childhood. And that can be crazy making too. Let's see who's that thing. Carolyn. Carolyn's saying good night, Dana, on Periscope. Good night, Carolyn. It's really it's tough and it's crazy making when your siblings, when you're like you were there and they don't remember that. They remember things very, very differently. Um that's a very valid point. Amy says being the golden child is no bowl of cherries either. Very, very true. So the golden child, that's kind of this double-edged sword, right? Because the narcissist will often, it's this feeling of, their golden child is them. Like they are an extension of them. And so the golden child doesn't have their own identity. They're not really entitled to their own feelings or their own persona. They're there to serve the parent. And because a narcissist's love is very conditional, they run very hot and cold, right? And for children, they're walking a tightrope if you've got a narcissist as a parent. So yeah, it's a tough line to walk. Um, True Love says, I still romanticize him. One day I'm strong, one day I'm sad and I cry, but overall better at 43 days, no contact. But when I really get down, I really want him back again, and I wish I could fix it. I wish I could fix him. I get it. I think we all get it. I think we've all been there, and it's hard. It's hard. It's hard to let go of the Dr. Jekyll, right? And to realize that they are the same person. Like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde coexist in this one person. And we love the Dr. Jekyll, but that Mr. Hyde is a deal breaker. Like we can't have that. They'll kill us. Like they'll destroy us. Either they'll kill us physically, literally, or psychologically and emotionally, they will just destroy us. And, it's tough. And I think that's why a lot of people have a hard time moving on with these relationships. And again, abusive people are people, right? And they're not, and people in general are not 100% good or bad. And so, especially if we all have it, if we all have this conception of what abuse is, what an abuser is, what abusive behavior looks like, what an abusive relationship is, if our relationship doesn't match that idea in our head, it can be very confusing because it's very easy to think about, well, maybe this is a normal relationship that just has the normal highs and lows. Even though we kind of know deep down that it's not, we hope that it is because there might be a lot of good in this person. But, it's there's lots of good in lots of different people, right? But yeah, it's hard. It's hard to make peace with the fact that this is just that we're here, right? It's hard to make peace with the fact that we're here, that we were in this kind of a relationship, and everything that goes along with it. So I mentioned this every single video. Meetup.com is fantastic. It's not a dating site. It's free. It's a great way to get out there and to meet different people based around your interests. And, the benefit of that, I think, is you're meeting a lot of people. It helps to develop more of that attitude of abundance versus that attitude of scarcity, because when you're with in a relationship, right, like we talked about earlier, we kind of get tunnel vision and we get really hung up on this person. And it's kind of like this love addiction. And a great way to help break that is to develop this attitude of abundance, realizing that there's more fish in the sea. There's lots of people out there we've never even met, right? And that we might like even better, but we have to go out and meet these people. And I'm not saying that we need to go out and date them, but sometimes it's just nice to be around other people and realize that life does go on. There are other people out there, that we can still be happy, that we can enjoy other people's company. I think it takes us a lot longer to heal if we're staying inside, if we're not doing anything other than kind of fixating on this relationship. It helps to take a break, to just mentally tell yourself, like, I'm just gonna set all of this down. Like, I'm just going to set all of this down. I'm going to go watch a comedy. I'm going to go clean out my car. I'm going to go do something else, because our brain, when it's trying to process all of this, because it's so confusing, it just tends to go into hyperdrive, and it's like this obsessive need to discuss narcissism and to try to figure them out and to, you know, it, I get it. I've been there, but it's nice, I think, to just take a time out and go do something totally unrelated. Go have some fun. Go try something new. Go meet some different people, and just give your brain a break, and go just be good to yourself. Like, be good to yourself. Yes. Chetty says, when they feel you becoming independent and sick of their crap, they will try to crawl back in and woo you to start the twisted cycle over again. They play you like a yo yo. Yes, they do, and they can. And so, again, this is all about, abusive people. It's all about power and control, right? And so, if they realize that they're losing power and control, if their target is moving on, you know, they go bananas. And so then they kind of triple up on their efforts with text messages or phone calls, or it's the whole kind of honeymoon part of it all again, right? The idealized stage starts up again. And so then it's the, promises of change and future faking. And let's talk about, they're talking about having babies and moving in together and going on vacation and everything that their target wants, because they're trying to start this cycle again. It's this dance of insanity is what it is. But it takes us, you know, several times generally of dancing this dance before we see that it's a dance. It's not a relationship, like it's a dance. Or a roller coaster. Like, we think we're, in a relationship, but we're not. We're on a roller coaster. Again, there's a lot of elements in an abusive relationship that are also present in a healthy relationship. So it can take a while for a person to sort out what on earth is really going on, especially because friends and family and members of their church and other people might not identify that it's an abusive relationship. Like, most likely will not be able to identify that it's an abusive relationship. So they might also be pushing them into staying and working on things and giving them a second or a 20-second chance. It's everything about an abusive relationship is crazy making. Like, everything. So, oh boy. Yeah, True Love says, my ex said a while back that he wanted to start over with me, but it would mean that he'd have to file bankruptcy and for me to pay his car bill and credit card payments in the meantime. Oh boy. Yeah. No, that's not what that means. Because if honestly, if he files bankruptcy, then he would have to declare all of that. The credit card payments would be rolled into the bankruptcy. everything would be frozen. All of his assets and liability, everything would be frozen. They'd have to declare all of that. So the car payment would go into the bankruptcy, the credit cards would go into the bankruptcy, and then the courts would decide how they'd handle that. So it would be really squirrely if he would go into bankruptcy and then was having you pay his bills, because to me that's saying that he's actually not going into bankruptcy. He's just getting you to pay for everything. Just saying. Susan says, are there covert narcissists who don't cheat or who are not addicted to porn or that are not abusive? Yeah, there's not all narcissists are hypersexual. A lot of them are. I think a lot of people that tend to seek out support groups tend to, or therapy, tend to go because they found their partners cheating. Because again, remember, like we talked about earlier, the thing with narcissists is they are the fire that we can't deny, but there's been like a low level of smoke for a long time. And in that relationship, but also probably in other parts of our life. But just in that relationship, they might have had a lot of other bad behavior that we were able to gloss over. But for most people, like the deal breaker thing is cheating. Because obviously, right? Like people, like nobody likes to be cheated on. So if they find out they've had an affair, or they got somebody pregnant, then their partner can't deny that anymore. But they can deny the lies. They can deny the mismanagement of household funds. They can deny the other squirrely behavior. But once they find out they're cheating, then they get upset. Then they demand change. So I think that's why you might see like a disproportionate amount of people that have a narcissistic partner in support groups that have been cheated on, but not all of them cheat. You know, I think a lot of them do, because they also they don't have empathy or remorse, and they don't really feel like rules in general apply to them. They kind of want whatever they want whenever they want it. They're very childlike in that sense, and they feel justified in doing whatever they do. But I would say all narcissists are abusive. They're not all necessarily physically abusive, but there's multiple forms of abuse, right? So there's emotional abuse, and emotional. There's verbal. There's physical. There's financial. There's sexual. There's spiritual, psychological. So they tend to abuse in different ways. I'm not sure, again, I think that's still kind of up for debate, like how much of their abuse is necessarily conscious. I mean, I think a lot of times they're gaslighting and stuff. Sometimes it's intentional, but sometimes I don't know if they really know what they're doing. It's very, I mean, we'll never know because we're not inside their head, but, I know from studies with most like abusive partners, they identify, like if you were to add, a lot, and of course a lot of these programs, these therapy groups for abuse, they're mainly for abusive men, but, the abusive men identify as being kind and considerate and good, the exact opposite of what they are. So they have this like backwards wiring in their brain. And this is not just, a few people. I mean, this is like thousands of studies have been done. It's very, very interesting how abusers do not see themselves as abusive. And so this is another reason it's really hard for them to actually get help and to change, because they don't see it. They just don't see it. Let's see. True Love says, to tell you the truth, I already saved him from bankruptcy once 3 years ago because he said we'd get married. Then I paid for his bills while he went back to school. Then he finished and he discarded me. Wow, I am really sorry. That's, yeah, how hurtful. How incredibly hurtful and frustrating and angering. I can imagine. Yes, so Chetty says, I think most narcissists start with emotional abuse because that is how they trap you first. First off, yes. So physical abuse, by and large, like 99, probably 0.95% of the time, is preceded by either verbal or emotional abuse. Most abusive people don't just start off with, punching somebody. That they work up to that. So it tends to start off with that. Again, it's that strange behavior. Confusion is the first sign of abuse. So it starts off with that, calling a person a certain name, or yelling at them for no reason, or some sort of unsettling behavior that's out of the clear blue. And then it kind of escalates. And then it's sort of like, wow, this person really gets like disproportionately upset over little things. There's always signs. It's whether or not we see these signs as the red flags of controlling behavior or not, right? Like, we might not realize what they are, because it's, if we're not like that, we're like, well, that's kind of weird, but we chalk it up. We don't realize these are the signs of an abusive, controlling person. But yes, and it escalates and it escalates and it escalates. But, not all verbally or emotionally abusive people go on to physically abuse, but again, that doesn't really matter, because all abuse is damaging. It's all equally as damaging. And I would say honestly that maybe that's not even true, because I think if you were to ask most victims of abuse, they would tell you that it's more the emotional, psychological, the verbal abuse that's the worst, because bruises heal, bruises fade. It's the mental scars that are hard to get over. And there's a lot of like deprogramming and reprogramming that has to go into things. So, okay guys, it is late and I have got to get to bed. So thank you everybody so much for being here tonight. It's been a fantastic, great questions, and I appreciate all of you so much, and the support that you give each other. And it's just a really neat community, and it's 100% due to everybody here. So just know that you guys are very much all appreciated and loved, and it's you know it's I really enjoy seeing everybody every week. So yes, love you guys. Take care. And as always, you are not alone. You are not crazy, and you can move forward and heal from this. Okay. So big hugs to you, and I will see you next week. Okay. 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay. Bye.